Thank you very much, Mr. Burke. For those of you who have not yet exported to Europe, you've gotten a sense that we have a bit of an expert here, so I would encourage you to call on him. You know who he is now, and you can see from his experience what he's done. And now, for those of you who have not yet exported, we have a little overview. So it is my pleasure to introduce the next speaker to you. He's a longtime colleague in the Canadian Trade Commissioner Service, Sanjeev Chery. He is currently the Director of the Free Trade Agreements Promotion Task Force in Global Affairs Canada. He was our Consul General in Rio de Janeiro from 2011 to last year, 2017. During the course of his career, Sanjeev has also served abroad as our Consul General in Ho Chi Minh City in Vietnam and in Mumbai, India, as our Acting High Commissioner in Sri Lanka and the Acting Ambassador to the Maldives. He has also been the Deputy Chief of Protocol for our department and has served as the Director in the Office of the Deputy Prime Minister and in the Office of the Minister of Finance. Sanjeev is a native son of Nova Scotia, having been born and raised right here in Halifax. Please join me in welcoming back to Canada's Ocean Playground, Sanjeev Chery.
Good morning, everybody. As a native Haligonian, I arrived here. Andy's already starting to laugh because he knows what I do when I arrive at the Halifax International Airport. I commandeered a car with my right-hand guy here, Jordan. Where are you, Jordan? He's right back there from Calgary, Alberta. Jordan and I arrived on Friday and went straight to King of Donair and then to the hotel. So I wanted to introduce Jordan to the delicacy, the official food of Halifax, Nova Scotia. And I can honestly say I had nothing to do with the fact that the mayor of Halifax broke the tie when that motion came to City Council to make the donair the official food of Halifax, even though he did stay with me in Rio de Janeiro, and I was trying to indoctrinate him the entire 24 hours he was there to support the donair. At any rate, it's great to be back in Nova Scotia, and we are going to give you a quick overview of the Canada-Europe trade agreement. A lot of people think Ceta, C-E-T-A. They think the C-E stands for Canada-Europe, but it doesn't. It actually, the Canada-European Union part comes before CETA. So it's the Canada-EU-CETA. CETA stands for Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement. I learned this after 3 months on the job, that the CE doesn't stand for Canada-Europe. Okay, here we go. Jordan, let's start. Are you mic'd up? Oh. That's Kathy. I'm not Kathy, although we are often mistaken one for the other. He's gonna get this. We've only practiced this for hours yesterday, so.
Sorry, we
go.
We had a couple title cards for our
which we never
partners,
used. Okay, that's me. Now we're in the right area. Let's go. Okay, so we just have a few slides here. We're just going to give you a quick overview of CETA, and then as I mentioned to many people, and if you've read any of the blogs or the interviews that we've done, this particular road trip, which is going to Halifax today, Moncton tomorrow, Charlottetown Wednesday, and St. John's on Friday, is what I'm calling the Rolls-Royce of the CETA roadshows. We have people here with us from Global Affairs Canada, former members of Global Affairs Canada that are have all been invited by me. I'm standing right behind one of our most famous former employees of Global Affairs. This is David Plunkett, who was our ambassador to the European Union until last year, was it? Okay, well, we wish it was until last year, but 2015. David's here. He's going to moderate a panel in a few minutes. We've asked him to come back for a trip. Josie Mousseau is here, my dear friend. She's in charge of Global Affairs Canada Business Women in Trade Program. Claude, are you over there? Did I see you? There's Claude Dagenet. He's actually from New Brunswick, but he works at Global Affairs Canada. He's in charge of the Indigenous Business group at Global Affairs Canada. We've got our 4 senior trade commissioners from Europe who are in the panel right after this, who you're going to meet. So we've brought in the who's who of people from Global Affairs Canada for this event today. And why? Because before CETA, 25% of tariff lines, as Osborne noted on his slide, 25% of the tariff lines were duty-free. On September 21st, the agreement actually kicked in. Osborne had on his slide February 2017, but it was actually September. I hope you didn't ship anything over between February and September, because you're going to be getting a bill for it later. But September 21st, 98% of stuff, tariff lines went to 0, including live lobster. So it's quite it's an incredible jump, and we're going to have another 1% go down to 0 over the next 7 years. It's being phased in slowly, so it will be 99% of tariff lines that are going in to Europe that will be tariff-free. We have just this slide. We wanted to show you, we've got one for every province. What are the benefits for Nova Scotia? We've done a little bit of research, as Laurel mentioned, about the amount of money from Nova Scotia, the merchandise exports. Luckily, we have the same number, $442 million in 2016. We're very particular to make sure that all of our numbers match, because sometimes we see presentations and people have 3 different numbers throughout, but we've vetted all of this with the Office of the Chief Economist in Ottawa. I just wanted to give you an idea. Obviously, the biggest one there is fish and seafood, and that's why I'm standing behind this wonderful woman here, our Senior Trade Commissioner in Brussels at the European Union, Michelle Cooper, who is on a panel with me. Is that you, Michelle? It is you. Yeah, okay. Sorry. She's on a panel right after this, but she's also in the Export Cafe. She's our fish and seafood expert. We brought her in from Brussels for this Atlantic tour because we figured that it would be of interest to many people in this room. So she is one of the 4 that you're going to see in a few minutes from Europe that we've flown in. She just got here yesterday, poor thing. She's jet-lagged, but she missed her connecting flight in Montreal, but she still found time to attend the lobster dinner that I organized last night at Salty's. She managed to arrive 5 minutes before the dinner, and as a true champion, she ate that entire lobster roll in 30 minutes or less. Okay, let's keep going. Okay, well, I guess this is the same thing as last time, but this is just to give you an idea of some of the stuff that's now duty-free. Keep going, Jordan, let's move. So Laurel mentioned a lot of this in her remarks, but I guess the one thing that I always tell people is that there are 5 kind of key parts of this agreement. No free trade agreement is simple. So you got to read it, you got to kind of study it, you got to kind of use it to learn it. But if I had to highlight the 5 kind of key areas of Ceta that are going to be of great advantage to Canadians, it's the fact that, as Laurel mentioned, we have access to public procurement for the first time. It's a $3.3 trillion government procurement market in Europe. That's at the federal, provincial, and municipal level. They also have access to our government market here, which, some people say, well, what's so great about that? I say, well, what's great about that is that it encourages competition, and some municipalities, provinces, federal government, we can actually save money if bids come in from Europe that are cheaper. But it's both ways. So we have access now to public procurement. Number 2, streamlined customs and trade facilitation. You heard Osborne talking about some of the idiosyncrasies of exporting to Europe. It's true, every country does have slightly different requirements. There are 28 countries in the EU, so you have to keep that in mind. But we have streamlined that, and we're going to get into that a little later on. Tariff elimination on the top there, you saw it's 98%, going to 99% over the next 7 years. Clear rules of origin. Rules of origin are never easy to understand, but if you read through the chapter, which we're going to show you in a second, you have to read it. You got to understand it, but you can actually, there are many ways to determine rules of origin. Even before you export, we're going to talk about that a little later, but you can actually do an advanced ruling with your importer in the EU to make sure that your product does meet the rule of origin requirement. So that's something called a BOI, Binding Origin Information. You can apply in advance. So if you're not sure if your product is going to actually meet the requirements, if you still don't understand the rules of origin after reading the chapter, you can apply. It takes about 5 months right now. That's the maximum for the EU to render a decision, but you don't have to take any risk. You can apply in advance, make sure you meet all the requirements, and then ship your products over. So that's something really neat. And then the last thing, of course, is enhanced labor mobility, which Ambassador Plunkett and Pascal Kernis. Pascal, is he here yet? There he is. We've brought Pascal Kernis from the European Services Forum. He just raised his hand here. We brought him also over from Brussels. He arrived yesterday, and Ambassador Plunkett, and he will be doing a panel, two panels from now up here on the stage, and they're also at the Export Cafe, and they're going to touch a little bit more on labor mobility. This is the most important slide in my presentation, and I'm coming to the end now. I just want to run through for you guys how important this website is. This is a website, at the bottom you see there, international.gc.ca/CETA. That's the Global Affairs Canada website about this agreement. We have put a lot of money, a lot of research into this site. We've tried to make it as user-friendly as possible. I'm going to click on this link now, or Jordan is going to click on it, and we're going to just show you a couple things on here because we want, oh yeah, hold there for 1 second, Jordan, sorry. Are those, here we go, yeah, perfect. So this is our page, our landing page for Ceta. That's the international.gc.ca webpage. That picture there on the top right is our trade minister, Minister for International Trade, Francois-Philippe Champagne. And there's a little video there that you can listen to. It's only 2.5 minutes long, so the minister introduces Ceta to the Canadian public. But basically, this website is split into more or less 3 areas. Okay, stop right there, Jordan. What does Ceta mean for Canadian companies? What does Ceta mean for foreign investors? And the EU for you. We're going to start on the top there. What does Ceta mean for Canadian companies? Go on the right there, Jordan, learn about Ceta. This is I wanted to show you this particular part of the website. Over here, we have the agreement overview, the final text of the agreement. If you're suffering from insomnia, you can read any of those too. But can you click on the chapter summaries there, Jordan? On chapter summaries, we have, frankly, a chapter summary. So we have summaries of all the different chapters. The ones that people mostly like to read first before they go into the main agreement to get all the details is chapter, you don't have to click on this, Jordan, but just show them chapter 2, protocol 1. So that's the rules of origin and origin procedures. And then chapter 10, temporary entry and stay of natural persons for business purposes. Again, we're going to have Ambassador Plunkett and Pascal talk a little bit about that later on. But this is the chapter summaries. I find them a lot easier to kind of browse through the first time before you go into the actual agreement. Okay, let's go back. Okay, so that's the chapter summaries. If we go down to the next section here, go down. Go back one, yeah, go back one, sorry. Yeah. So over here, the EU for you, we have something called the Canada Tariff Finder. We're going to click on that and give you a quick example of how that works. If you want to know what your current tariff is on your product that you may be shipping over to Europe, this is a tool that we have developed with the BDC and the EDC. We've spent a lot of money on this. Is it perfect? No, it's far from perfect. But it's the best tool we've got, and it works pretty well. We're updating it, the 3 of us, the EDC, BDC, and GAC, Global Affairs Canada. We're updating it this year, and that will happen in March. But we wanted to just show you how easy it is to use. Click there on Get Started. So you go to the Canada Tariff Finder, you click here, and it's just 3 steps, 1, 2, 3. The first step's already done for you, so you're exporting. You can pick a country. Let's pick, what country should we pick, Jordan?
How about France?
Okay, let's pick France. This is all rehearsed, everybody. We've rehearsed this. It's all fake. Okay, and let's pick a product, Jordan. What should we pick?
How about telephones?
Very good. Okay, so there we go. We tried to find one easy last night on the website that would be easy to find. So we type in France, we type in telephones, hit find. So there we go. Look, so it will list all the different products that come up when you type in telephones that you want to export to France. If you click on the first line there, let's see, it says line telephone sets with cordless handsets. It's broken down further into line telephone sets, blah, blah. So if you click on that, you'll see what your tariff is. Go down, 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 and the tariff is 0.
Wow.
So isn't that great? Yes, thank you. I told him not to sound so fake, but I don't think he's, well, he is, well, yeah, he has actually produced theater productions, but he actually hasn't started any, and that's pretty obvious. At any rate, so it's 0% all across. You can see what your tariff rate is. This Tariff Finder tool doesn't only cover the 28 countries in Europe, it also covers some of our other free trade agreement countries. I think we've got, what is it? Korea, Canada, Korea, and I think we have...
Ukraine?
Ukraine, yeah. I was going to say Ukraine, but I wasn't sure. Thank you, Jordan. Canada, Ukraine, Canada, Korea. We have some of our other trade agreements in here, and we're looking to update others so that Canada actually has 13 free trade agreements. You may not be aware of that, but we have 13. It will soon be 14 when we join the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the TPP that the minister announced we would be signing in March, and that'll take another year and a half for it to be ratified, but we will soon have 14 agreements. But we have 13 right now. But this one covers, the Canada Tariff Finder covers 3 as far as I know for the time being. So this Tariff Finder, you got to go in here, you got to play with it, you got to try different names for products, blah, blah. If you know your HS code, you can just type in your HS code here, and it's even easier. It's faster. But we just wanted to give you an example of how the Canada Tariff Finder works. Okay, let's go back to the website. I don't know what this is. He's got all these screwed up here. Let's go back to the website. There we go. Go back. I want to show them the icons at the bottom. The 6 round icons. Go There we go. Go down a bit. Okay, so and then this thing is the last part here is called the Toolkit. The Toolkit, so this is all on the same page, okay? So you've seen the chapter summaries, you've seen the Canada Tariff Finder, and now you see this Toolkit. So we've got 6 icons here. We're not gonna, I'm just gonna click on one, but I just wanna show you top right, exporting to the EU, a guide for Canadian businesses. Don't click on it, I just wanna show them that. This is one of the few guides that we get so many comments about, positive comments about. It really is a step-by-step guide for anybody that wants to export to the EU. A lot of work has gone into this guide. We're going to update it in in about a year or so. It's great. So if you have not exported to the EU, or even if you are, this is a guide that you should read. Then right below that icon is called the Ceta Promotion Toolkit. I love this icon. I probably love it because I added it after I started, so it's mine. Let's click on there. Ceta Promotion Toolkit. In here, I just want to show you guys that we have here basically, if you click on the Ceta benefits fact sheets by province and region, just click on there, Jordan. We're not going to click on any, but what we did was, this is all new. We put this all up for September 21st when the agreement came into effect. We have gone and done a research project on every province. On some provinces, we have more than one listing because it's larger. Nova Scotia's got its own entry there, and what we've done is we've done a little bit of research on as to which province, what we think are your best bets for exporting to Europe, where your greatest strengths are. Next to that, we have something called Ceta benefits by sector. I just want to click on that drop down. Yeah. So we've chosen also, Global Affairs Canada has chosen 12 sectors that we think have the greatest promise for, again, exporting to the EU. And we've got a couple pager on for example, I noticed for some of the Export Cafe appointments later on that we've got some companies from the fish and seafood sector, from ICT, et cetera, et cetera. This is a great place to go just to see, it's a 2-3 pager on each of these sectors, 12. It doesn't mean that these are the only sectors, of course, that hold promise for Canada-EU trade, but it's the 12 that we kind of highlight as having the greatest potential for us to export to the EU. So let's go back, Jordan. So this is basically you just go back up to the top. This is basically the landing page with our minister there kicking it off. Can you just go down into the middle part for 1 second, Jordan? Slowly. Oh yeah, I wanted to show you this also, this last part here, again on the main page, the EU for you. If you click on that middle one there, Jordan, the EU's markets, right next to the Tariff Finder. This is a great little summary. It's a 2 to 3 page summary of every country in the EU, what their economy, their population, what their strengths are, where we see the greatest opportunities. A great place to go and read if you want to, particularly if you're pinpointing a specific country that you want to export to, all updated. And as you know, we have 4 senior trade commissioners, as I mentioned, who are about to join me on stage. And in fact, while I wrap up, I'd like to ask Michelle, John, Samina, and Greg to please, and Francis, where's Francis? You're there? Francis from Global Affairs Canada, I'd like to ask you guys to make your way back here to the corner where this gentleman is standing up. He's going to mic you up for the next session. So while I take some questions from the crowd, if you guys could slowly make your way there, it'll save some time. He's going to, and don't say anything bad about me because the mics are live. So you can get mic'd up while we're taking some questions. So that's a bit of an overview, gang, of the agreement. And I'm happy if there are any questions while we kill 6 minutes for the next panel to start with our 4 senior trade commissioners and Francis Dorsemain, who is from Global Affairs Canada, from the European Bilateral Relations and Advocacy Division. We're all going to make our way up there in a second, and we are going to take your questions. We have a question here from Fred McDonald. Fred.
You've told us what the 98% represents. What does the 2% that aren't covered represent?
It's actually the 2% that is not covered are certain. For example, it's interesting. We were talking about this last night. 98% is tariff-free as of September 21st. Another 1% will be phased in over the next 7 years. I'll give you an example of what that 1% might be. So for example, live lobster dropped to 0 on September 21st, the tariff. I think it was 8%. Is that right? Yeah, I think it was 8%. I have so many tariff numbers in my head. Thank you. So frozen lobster is being phased in slowly over the next 7 years. It didn't go to zero on September 21st. And some of the products that have been chosen to be phased in over a period of time are products which have a greater impact on the competitive on competition with European firms. So what we're trying to do is slowly phase that in to give people an opportunity to get used to the fact that this will at one day become zero. So it wasn't an immediate overnight shock that it would go down to zero. So it's sometimes in areas like that. And the other 1% that will never come down to zero are in protected, more sensitive areas where we have decided that they will not be subject to tariff elimination. So it depends on, it could be defense products or an area where there's a national interest. Okay?
Sanjeev,
any other questions?
I have a question over here.
Very nice.
Hi. Has Canada's elimination of its tariffs on European goods come into force yet?
Did you read that question? Are you a student?
Yes.
I can tell. Where are you a student? Where at?
Halifax Grammar School.
Oh, that's great. Great. I used to do some work at the grammar school many years ago because I went to St. Mary's. Where's Boris? Boris, are you here? Mirchev? Boris is here. Boris, I saw him come in this morning. He and I went to St. Mary's together 28 years ago. I was in student politics, and Boris told me he voted for me. But I remember at the last seminar that I was at, Boris was there, and I heard him telling my competitor who showed up that he voted for her. So I don't know what's true, but I'm going to find out later. Anyway, what was your question again?
Has Canada's elimination of its tariffs on European goods come into force yet?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and it's an easy one for me, so thank you for asking it. On September 21st, we went from 25% to 98% overnight. So yes, it has come into effect, and now we are looking at phasing in the next 1% over the next 7 years. Some of that will happen faster. When you go to the Canada Tariff Finder and you look for your product, you saw when we just showed you telephones to France, you saw that it's dropped to zero right away on September 21st. But you will see if your particular product is not yet at zero, you will see in the Canada Tariff Finder when you look at the graph below, you'll see how it's going down over the next 5 to 7 years. If it's like, for example, 12%, then going to 10, 8. 6, blah, blah, blah. You'll see what that is depending on what your product is. Okay, so you can check it out there. The other way, same. Yeah, the other way, yeah, you meant the other way too? Yeah, so it happened both ways, 98% in both directions. And in fact, that if you stick around for lunch, if you're going to have a free lunch courtesy of NSBI, you will be able to meet the EU ambassador to Canada, Ambassador Oostubes, who's going to be here, and he's going to be talking to the crowd. And that would be a very good question to ask him as well, because we want to make sure that 98% both ways stays into effect and that we don't have any hiccups along the way. And so far, so good. Okay, any other questions before we?
Yes? Wait, I don't know if it's a stupid question. I'm going to whisper it first. How does Brexit affect the?
No, that's a very good question. I think you should ask that.
Yeah. You have to ask into the mic for the people live streaming. Go ahead.
No, that's fine. I just wanted to make sure it wasn't a stupid question.
There's never a stupid question, and I just hope I can answer it, or Jordan's in big trouble.
We don't know each other yet.
Jordan's in big trouble.
How does Brexit affect the agreement?
Okay, so Brexit, Greg Houlihan, where are you, Greg? Oh, Greg's over there. Greg's our Senior Trade Commissioner from the UK. He's going to be joining us on the panel in a few minutes. In fact, I can ask you guys, you can make your way up to the stage, Francis and gang, and I'll join you in a minute. Greg will get into that a little bit more, but I can tell you right now, the UK is a full member still of the EU. The Ceta applies to the UK. The UK has indicated, I learned all this from Greg because this is our second road trip together. The UK has indicated that they plan to ratify the agreement before they leave Brexit. Before Brexit it gets triggered, and Greg can talk a little bit more about the impact on the EU withdrawing from on the UK, sorry, withdrawing from the EU. But for the time being, the UK is a full member of the EU, and the agreement applies to the UK just as it would to any of the other 27 countries in the EU. Somebody over here had a question? Yeah, let's go here, and then we will start our next panel.
Yeah, on your toolkit, does it break down each country per machinery where it might have the greatest chances of selling equipment there? So.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't break it down by machinery. It gives an overview of the country. So you mean like specific in terms of like if you went to, like for example, if you go to one of those 28 countries, Bulgaria is one of them. If you click on there, do you mean like on that sheet? Right, right. Yeah. I think you'll find, I mean, I've read quite a few of those 2-3 pages on the countries, and there's a pretty good bit of information there. And then if you need anything further specifically on it, we can go to Francis's group in Global Affairs Canada. They do European Union bilateral relations and advocacy. You can get more information from them. So yeah, I think give it a shot. I'm not sure of the answer to your question. I just remember reading some of them, and I don't think it's split up that way. Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah, and you know what also would work for you might be the Tariff Finder. So if you type in, for example, the product that you want to export and you pick a country, you can see what those are. But we can try to figure out. I'm not really sure, but I think and maybe yeah, okay, and then maybe Ambassador Plunkett can give you some more information. Okay, Kathy, we're ready to go. All right.
Moving on to something that you've all been waiting for, my colleagues from Europe and from Global Affairs Canada, our Europe experts. But before we do that, I have the pleasure of welcoming Karl Schmeiser. He's NSBI's Director of Export Development, and he's going to actually introduce you to this phenomenal group of people, so you'll know who's who, and then Sanjeev's going to moderate the panel. Now, for those of you on this side of the room, I know this is not great, and it would have been nice if it was a transparent one, but you'll be able to hear them, and then you'll be able to meet them this afternoon. So, and I think you'll be able to know who's who when they're speaking. Thank you.
Perfect, thank you. First of all, in response to your question, we at NSBI, we have a product called Trade Market Intelligence, TMI, where we actually do research. Actually, and the person, yeah, Colleen is at your table, so she would love to talk to you about it. We do market research for companies, primary research. So that might be a product that would, or a service that would benefit you. Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy. I think we've been off to a really good start this morning with both Osborne's comments and with Sanjeev giving us a bit of an overview on Ceta. So I'm now looking forward to starting the panel session, the first panel session of the morning. And the first panel session is Doing Business in the EU, Marketing Opportunities for Canadian Businesses. Sanjeev, who we just met, is going to moderate the panel. I am going to introduce you to the other speakers that we have joining us up on the stage. I'm not going to give full bios for everyone, just in the essence of keeping us on schedule, but we do have bios in the packages on your tables. So the first expert that we have up here is Francis Dorseman, and he is the Deputy Director, Commercial, European Bilateral Relations and Advocacy Division, Global Affairs Canada. And then we have Samina Qureshi, who is a Senior Trade Commissioner within the Trade Commissioner Service in The Hague and Counselor within the Embassy of Canada to the Netherlands. Next we have Greg Houlihan, who is the Minister, Counselor and Senior Trade Commissioner at the High Commission of Canada in London. And then we have John Roxburgh, who is the Senior Trade Commissioner Service, Dublin Embassy of Canada to Ireland. And finally, Michelle Cooper, who is the Councillor and Head of Section for Agriculture, Fisheries and Environment, Mission of Canada to the European Union in Brussels. So I'll leave you with Sanjeev, and look forward to hearing from everybody on the panel.
Thanks, Kyle. Okay, so like I said, we flew in, Francis came from Ottawa. He's also suffering from jet lag. He's 1 hour. And I can tell you, Kyle, I've never heard anybody say anything nice about Francis except you, calling him an expert, so that's great. Francis and I have been posted together in India. We've worked together since 2004. So we invited him down, and he is very special to me. He's driving my van from Halifax to Moncton. I trust him with my life. We have 4 vans. We're hitting the road today to drive to Moncton, and Francis is driving me. He's also driving Michelle and Ambassador Plunkett. So we've all split up. So hopefully we'll skip the snow before it starts. But the others have all flown in from Europe. They all arrived yesterday. And we've invested a lot of money to bring these guys here. We want you to take full advantage of the fact that they're present. Somebody did ask me a very quick question out in the hall. It's a very simple question. There are no stupid questions here today. They asked me, what is a high commission versus an embassy? And Greg is from the Canadian High Commission in England. I just wanted to tell you, a high commission is an embassy. It's just that we call any, if you're a member of the Commonwealth and you're in a Commonwealth country, you're at a high commission, and the ambassador is called High Commissioner. For example, Canada is a member of the Commonwealth, of course the UK, so that's the High Commission. But Canada is a member of the Commonwealth, in the U.S. The U.S. is not a member of the Commonwealth, so our ambassador to the U.S. is called ambassador. So that's the only difference, and we call it a high commission. So that's all of these guys are senior trade commissioners from these 4 different missions in Europe, and they're going to talk to you a little bit. They're going to give you a 7 to 10 minute overview of their country, their market, their area of expertise, and then at the end we're going to take questions. But we're going to start off with Francis, who's from Ottawa, from our headquarters there. He's going to give you a little overview about his division, about the European Union in general, and then we're going to start in the order of Michelle Cooper first. And then we're going to have Greg, is that right? And then we're going to have John, and then Samina at the end, okay? So we're going to go in that order. Francis, over to you.
So I think that's working.
Yeah.
I'm going to stand up if that's easier. That way you guys from this side of the room can see me. You might not want to actually see me afterwards, but we'll see. Oh, look at that. I love this. Lots of technology. This is really, it is the Rolls Royce of our troop. So as they mentioned, as Sanjeev mentioned, my name is Francis Dorsemain. I'm a Deputy Director and Trade Commissioner based out of Ottawa. I work sort of on the back end, the back office with our Trade Commissioners here in the field. We work on strategy, we answer questions, we get involved in some more complex export questions, and coordinate with the various teams. As you heard, we've got people from different sections from all over global affairs. But most importantly, I'm a trade commissioner through and through, and it's a job that I love doing. So quick question, how many of you know what the Trade Commissioner Service is? And maybe show of hands, how many of you worked with the Trade Commissioner Service? Hopeful, we're going to capture the rest of you by the end of the day. So just a quick summary there. The TCS, or Trade Commissioner Service, it's the largest Canadian network of international business professionals around the world. We are everywhere you do business. We're going to give you a lot of information here today. The thing to take away, and especially from my little talk, is we are there to answer your questions. When I say I'm with the government, I'm here to help, I actually mean it. So we are in market to help you jumpstart your entry. We're here to try and lower some of your costs, answer your questions. We give you a lot of online resources, but we're also there in the market, building a network so you can actually jump in there, meet the people that we have carefully curated for you to meet. Now, the EU market has always offered, let's see, thanks, Jordan. EU market has always offered a lot of opportunities for Canadian businesses. What Ceta has done is open that up even more. It's given us this massive tariff advantage, which is really very important in the context of some of our big competitors like the US who are going into Europe. They're doing a lot of business. We now have this advantage, and we've got a window of opportunity ahead of the US getting in, which means that we want to encourage you to grow the numbers, grow your exports. So we heard earlier in terms of 442 million from Nova Scotia going into Europe, 2.7 billion from Atlantic Canada going into Europe. We've got over 100 billion in exports going from Canada and merchandise trade into Europe, and over 40 billion in services as well. So there's a lot of different opportunities, and what I'm here to talk about is that, yes, we have Ceta. It is a sort of a facilitating vehicle, but we've also got to think about the EU as sort of not just one market. It makes it a lot easier to go in, but you are still dealing with 28 markets. So I think we can probably go through. So the EU operates on the basis of a single market. They set the rules, regulations, entry conditions, which makes it a lot easier for you to go through, but it's still quite a complex system. But the big advantage that's there, that's the harmonization of those rules and regulations across market. Now, within the borders, if we go back here, so you've got a single market, incredibly diverse, 28 major member states, 23 official languages, and 19 of which use the euro. So what I want you to take away here is that while you're going into a larger single market, you also need to tailor your product to the individual markets that you're going into. And this is something Osborne touched on earlier. So you've got to think about languages, you've got to think about labeling, you've got to think about how your product is going to be received in that market. And in some cases, looking at the currency issues as well. There are several regional, sub-regional differences within the EU in terms of regulations, market dynamics, economic trends, which provides companies with a diversity of opportunities, but also some challenges. A good example is in terms of Northern Europe, Benelux, Ireland. You've got some low barriers to trade and investment, but really very interesting B2B market. If you go to Germany and Eastern Europe, you've got strongly integrated value chains. You've got some great quality products to build on, and it sets some really ideal conditions to invest in as well. I keep going over here instead of there. So some of the things to think about that are non-Ceta factors to trade, and I'm going to throw out the concepts here, but as Sanjeev went through, there's a lot of this information that you can do some research in terms of our Ceta website. You can find some of this stuff on the Trade Commissioner website as well. But you can also pick up the phone or send an email to one of our Trade Commissioner colleagues that are in the field. So certification and labeling, we've got a number of different tools that you can have a look at. And I believe Michelle will touch on some of this. But Blue Guide on implementation of the EU product rules is one of the areas that I really do recommend that you go in before looking at exporting into the market. So you have our resources that are from the Canadian government and the provincial government, but we're also very lucky in that the EU is also very keen to have these imports come in. And they have developed a lot of different products which will give you some guides to going through. And I suspect my colleagues from the EU will also talk about their fantastic tool, which is their Trade Help Desk. And that can answer a lot of questions for you before you go in. So in terms of certification, I'll just touch a couple of main points here. But prior to exporting into the EU, you really do need to be familiar with the relevant certification standards for the products, not just at the EU level, but on the member state level as well, as some of these can be different. Certification requirements also apply to the importation of certain food products and may require appropriate sanitary certificates. This is something you can pull from CFIA. You can get in touch with our trade commissioners on the ground, and Michelle has a wealth of knowledge on this area as well as their team. In terms of labeling, it's like exporting anywhere. You've got to find out what the labeling requirements are when you're going into the market. You can talk to your importer, you can speak to us, and this is a recurring theme. We're the Trade Commissioner Service. We're here to help you, so ask those questions. That's what we get paid to do, and that's what we get measured on as well. So it's very important to come and reach out to us. A lot of different product labels exist in the EU. You've got them at the EU level, national level. Some are mandatory, some are voluntary, some are environmental, energy, food labels. There's a wide variety, and I'm not going to spend more time going into that. But I do encourage you, again, speak to the TC, speak to your EU importer, and have a look at some of our online tools. VAT, value-added tax, is another concept that people need to be aware of, and where you pay it. This is effectively the GST and HST. You still have to pay it, and it varies based on the different member state as well. The last piece on this slide is CE marking. Now, first, if you're exporting into with chemical products, cosmetics, foodstuff, pharmaceuticals, you don't necessarily need to deal with the CE marking. But again, this is why it's important to speak to your trade commissioner. Now, this is a certification mark that indicates conformity with health, safety, and environmental protection standards. It's very important, and it allows you to then go throughout the European Economic Area. So once you've got it once, you can get it through the entire market. So if you've gone into, let's say, Belgium, you can then export that product into other different country markets throughout the European Union. So this is where the EU superstructure really does add an advantage to you as you get into the markets. Now, my next slide here deals with general data protection regulation. And I was asked to speak to this because it does actually affect when you are collecting information from individuals within the European Union. This is very important for those that are selling services, digital services across. And it's a rule that applies both to companies that are established in the EU, but also companies that are in Canada who will be collecting private and confidential information from EU citizens. What this does really is it it's used to strengthen and unify data protection. So it's a new system that's going to go into place May 25th of this year, and it'll be applicable across the entire EU immediately as a regulation and not a directive. And I'm not going to go into the differences on those either. What this does, it really does simplify the regulatory environment for international businesses, but it really strengthens that protection for individuals in the European Union. It gives rights to individuals in terms of consenting for data collection, similar to what we have in Canada. A right to be forgotten, so there is a requirement to delete the information that's collected, and that's something that an individual can come to you for. It establishes data protection officers, compliance, risk assessments. There's rules that pertain to notification of data breaches within 72 hours of a data breach. And there are some, there's some penalties for not sort of following these rules. So this is one piece that if you are getting involved with selling into the EU, where you are collecting private information about your customers, about your clients, you do need to be aware of this, and this is something you can become familiar with before you start your exporting, and I very much recommend that you do it. I think, got one last slide. So if you've noticed a recurring theme, come and talk to us. This is where we are. We are everywhere you do business in the EU. It's not just a single market, it's 28 markets, and this is a huge opportunity for you. If you're trying to find a market, you can pick and choose. You can find markets that are very competitive, very advanced, but you can also deal with markets within the EU that are also still at an emerging market size. So there's something for everyone. And this is something that we can help you do, is to determine where that market is that's the best fit for your product, best fit for your company. As a trade commissioner in the field, I give advice and say, yes, come to my market. I often also say, no, this is not the market for you. And I get my metrics go with that as well, so it works. I can say yes or I can say no. It's fantastic. And so what I really want to suggest and focus on here, I've got 4 colleagues that are going to come and speak to very specific markets that they are responsible for, and they can do deep dives into sectors that would be interesting for each of you, market entry strategies, and if you have any other questions in terms of sort of general EU or market specific, I'm happy to speak with you later. Thank you very much.
We've sold machines to Europe, and we have to certify with the CE mark, so we have to add some money to get those steps done.
Mm-hmm.
When they sell to us, are they going to have a CE mark or a different machine without the CE mark that they're going to be marketing in Canada?
So we have, as I understand it, or Sanjeev, you've got a...
I'm not sure.
Will they require a CE mark when it comes to Canada? They don't require it, but are they going to have a machine that's a little cheaper because they don't have to do radiation testing or magnetic?
But there are import requirements on both sides, and they're at the same level. So I'm not sure what mark they will require.
I'm worried about a competitor having a machine that's cheaper that they can sell in Canada, but we have to get the CE mark if we want to sell to them.
I'm not. I'll check into your question, but I don't know the answer right off the top of my head.
They'll need whatever certification is needed to be present in the Canadian market, Canadian Standards Association, or whatever for that specific product. They won't be able to undercut a Canadian competitor because the Canadian has to get their local certification.
So they won't require a CE mark?
Well, chances are, if they're selling from Europe, they will have a CE mark for selling domestically. Of
course.
It's not just an importation rule, but any domestic sales as well. So.
And I can mention the Standards Council of Canada signed an MOU with their European counterparts so that they can do mutual recognition. So I think maybe, Greg, you're going to touch on that, but it's something that's advantageous because you can get certified in one side and then you can go to the other side. So it'll be equal on both sides.
Okay.
Yeah.
It'll be equal.
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to go on now. I'm going to ask Michelle to come up to consider or be at the podium, but I'm going to ask each of the STCs, the Senior Trade Commissioners that are presenting, if we can, we're running 6 minutes behind schedule.
Okay.
So if we can That's okay. It's not your fault. Can we try
Actually,
to
I prefer
eliminate?
sitting.
Yeah, wherever you prefer. You can see the slides here in front.
As long as people can see me over there.
Yeah,
I'll
we're
just
going to
pull up a
try
bit.
and spend about 7 minutes each
All right.
on our markets, and then we're going to take questions at the end. Okay, go ahead, Michelle.
Okay, thank you, and good morning, everyone. And as Sanjeev mentioned, you mentioned the thing about the High Commission. Well, I'm also at a mission. We call it a mission of Canada to the European Union, because the European Union is, of course, not a country, so we do not have embassies. We do have an embassy in Brussels, which is to Belgium and then Luxembourg as well. And my colleague Greg Rust isn't here today, but he's our senior trade commissioner, so happy to take questions on Belgium as well and take them back if I can't answer them today. But our mission of Canada to the EU is mostly because of the common commercial policy and other common policies that are determined at the European Union level, like Ceta, of course. So that is why we have a mission there, and we work very closely with our counterparts in the Commission, the Council, and many other EU institutions. And particularly on things like policy questions, particularly on sectors that are difficult, like environment, agriculture, fisheries, 3 areas I look at, it really does matter what goes on at the European Union level. Even though individual member states can go down, it is important first what the EU policy that's made at the 28 member states. Oh, I'm going the wrong way. But today I'm here to talk to you about agri-food and fish and seafood opportunities. 2 big sectors I know for Nova Scotia and many in the Atlantic provinces. Francis mentioned some of the general benefits. You know that it's over 500 million customers. You know it's 20% of the world's GDP. It's a big market. But another important thing is it's the world's largest importer of agriculture and agri-food products in the world. So they are a big market. And I just wanted to throw out a couple of the figures that I have, because they import $163 billion in 2016 figures, which is 16% of the world's total trade. But here's an internal market statistic. It's $694 billion is traded amongst member states as well. So you get into this, you're talking about trade that's up to almost $1 trillion going on in agri-food and agriculture trade. So it's a big market. And Ceta is, as we mentioned, a competitive advantage over other major agri-food exporters, and it also levels the playing field with some others. So I'll mention, the US has been mentioned many times. Don't know if people saw the New York Times article on live lobster. That was out I'm sure a few of you did, that it said that Trump's trade policy is working for Canada. We were happy to see that, because great profile. And we want to see more people realizing that there is a market advantage for Canadian companies over our competitors. Other major agri-food exporters, other ones that you might know of, are Mercosur, the Southern Americans. They do not have an FTA. China does not have an FTA. Southeast Asia does not, so it's Australia, New Zealand, so we are really on the front of, as a major G7 country, getting in that market. Because tariffs on agri-food in the EU have been historically quite high, much higher than in Canada, as an example, in many areas, particularly on processed foods. So the value-added side is where the tariffs are really coming down, and that's where we think they'll be a major. It also levels the playing field in some sectors, such as fish and seafood, with Norway, as an example, because I know Norway is a major competitor. And at the Seafood Expo Global, which we have in Brussels every year, we see people coming up and going, wow, now you compete with Norway. So it's not just about getting ahead of people, it's also about getting back into business in some areas. So in terms of numbers, it was mentioned already, the 98% figure, but in agri-food, it's 94% eliminated immediately on agri-food. That's as of September 2017. It's 96% on seafood, so that's a very big advantage. But one figure I'm sure is interesting to people is 100% of fish and seafood tariffs will be duty-free at the end of 7 years. Not a single tariff will remain going in from Canada into the EU on any fish and seafood products. So that's a huge advantage, so much so that Norway had to renegotiate their agreement, and they're still in the process of doing it to actually try and keep up with us. So good deal, and it's a really good opportunity.
Michelle keeps mentioning Norway. I just add, Norway is not part of the EU. It's something I also learned after 3 months on the job. So I don't know why, and I don't want to get into that now.
Yeah, it's a long story.
It's a long story, and I'm not interested. But Norway, when you hear her referring to Norway, it's one of the few European countries besides Switzerland, for example, which is a neutral policy. But it's not part of the EU, in case you're wondering.
Yeah, it's part of the European Economic Area, but it's not as good a deal in some areas, and that's what they told us. They said, wow, you guys got a better deal than we did in fish and seafood. So that tells you something. Good negotiators, right, David? And before Ceta, one thing I did want to highlight is we only had a 2.1% market share in the EU. It's pretty low. And I think the opportunity to grow is really strong. So I think I want to highlight that as well. This we have the slides, so I think you're going to be sending out the presentations because I know it's quite detailed here. But a good example is, the 94% of agriculture lines becoming duty-free. There's all kinds of ones in here that I'm sure of interest. I know there's a lot of fruits in Nova Scotia and in the Atlantic provinces, so things like blueberries right down to zero, cranberries down to zero, lots of fresh fruits. We also have wine goes to zero, and other beverages. So these are really interesting sectors. Maple syrup, another one that I know is of interest here, also going to zero. So they're all zero. They've all been zero since September 2017. We have a few phase-outs that will occur in agri-food because of, obviously, there's some sensitive products, things like wheat that everybody knows about. And there are going to be some tariff rate quotas, which are quotas for some of the more sensitive sectors. And I'm sure people know in Canada the dairy is sensitive here. In the EU, similarly, in a lot of the meats area, so beef and pork in particular, we agreed to quotas that will be phased in over I think it's 5 years for the beef. Opportunities, it's all over the market in the EU. I mean, you have some of our senior trade commissioners who will talk about their sectors, but we deal with, as a network, there is a multi-country sector team on agri-food all over the EU that is led by Julie Ferguson-Sneedy, and who many people may know, who do fish and seafood. She does the fish and seafood side, and Yannick Delay in Paris. And they meet and they talk regularly about all the trade shows. So I have a list here, if anyone wants, of like 20 plus trade shows on agri-food in the EU and in different sectors. Organics is a good example. And also, there are specific opportunities. So as Sanjeev has said, you want to talk in each market, but this is some of the highlights. And one of the things that we are really trying to get people to pay attention to more is the opportunities in the value added and the process side. And when I mentioned organics, bio as they call it in Belgium, that is a huge area. Gluten-free foods is another area of huge advantages right now. So we've got, they are very sophisticated customers in the EU. They know what they want. If you can target your market, it'll be a huge advantage for you. And I think, we did talk about the whole fact that there's 28 markets, but sometimes if your product starts to do well in one market, it gets picked up. An example would be France and Belgium, because it's the same language. So, and we've also seen that the UK and Ireland as an example. So it can, if you get in one market, it can help you open you up. Getting to fish and seafood, as I mentioned, 100% over 7 years. There are a few phase outs. You can see on the left side of the slide, those are all now zero. So the live lobster has been mentioned many times, 8% down. Shrimp, I know shrimp is another area of great interest. That is not only gone to zero, but there's no more processing requirements because there was an issue where Canadian shrimp had to go to the EU, be processed. Now that's gone. There's no requirements anymore on what you do in order to get zero. There'll be a few phase outs, mostly on more the processed side because that was a sensitive issue for the Europeans. Obviously, they were taking a lot of raw product and processing it inside the European Union, so they were a bit worried about being competitive with us. But in some cases, like frozen lobster, it'll be 3 years, and then in 2020, it'll be duty-free. So there's lots of opportunity here. The opportunities, again, we've surveyed all our trade commissioners in the EU across the 28 markets of what are the areas of possible advantages, and they're coming in with all kinds of different areas. It's a really popular market for fish and seafood right now. The Europeans are major importers of fish and seafood, as we know, and they are looking for good product, high quality product, good price, obviously, that's always there. But the tariff advantage will be a big player, I think, for people. So I think these are good areas. There's a couple of two things I want to mention. One is the Seafood Expo Global, which many companies from the Atlantic Canada participated in. That's in April this year, April 23rd to the 25th. So we hope to see many of you there. It's the world's largest seafood show. And our mission organizes meetings in conjunction with Agriculture, Agri-Food Canada. I don't know if Agriculture is here today.
They are. The Agriculture and Agri-Food's here. They'll be at the Export Cafe.
Yeah, so they help set up the show with us. And we're working on a seafood exporter guide to the EU. So similar to the exporter guide to the EU that's already on the website, we're doing a very specific one just for fish and seafood. And we're hoping to have that ready in time for the Seafood Expo Global. Last thing, I think I'm not going to touch too much on this, but because Francis already did, but there's a lot of market requirements in the EU that you will have to be aware of. As mentioned, a lot of this is about sanitary certificates, things like pesticide residues, especially if you're shipping things like fruits and vegetables. There are some pre-product approvals, so come see your trade commissioners, and labeling is another one. But I did want to mention one thing for fish, which is obviously there is the need for a catch certificate for wild-caught fisheries. That's important. DFO manages that with the European unions, and this is to make sure that fishing is not coming from illegal sources under illegal. And last, just some tips. This is the overall tips, and I'm sure the individual markets can give you highlights for their markets, but it's sustainability is a big word in the EU now. People want to know where their food comes from. Sometimes they want to know not only just does it make me feel good, but it's also, is it good for the world too? So I think that's kind of the line we use. And you have to think about things like sustainability. You have to think about if you're going to use pesticides. Those things are important in the European Union. And they're caring more and more about social issues too. And so you'll see through the retailers in particular, but also through the processors now, they're demanding higher quality certification standards, and they're looking for making sure that they can sell that product. People care where their food comes from, I find in Europe. It's a very important thing to them. So consumer tastes, very different though across different markets, so hence know your market. Talk to the trade commissioners. So there we are. I think we can achieve success, and I think we have a great opportunity.
Great. Thanks very much, Michelle. We're going to go right into our Senior Trade Commissioner from the High Commission of Canada, the UK. Thank you. That was great, Michelle. Greg Houlihan. Greg is on his second trip with me. We did a pilot trip in November before we rolled out the Rolls Royce of these trips here to Atlantic Canada. So Greg, it's great to have you back. You did such a nice job on the first time around that we had you back again. So welcome, and over to you.
Great. Well, thank you very much. So I'm based at the High Commission of Canada in London, in beautiful Trafalgar Square, in fantastically renovated new building, Canada House, but it's a building that's 200 years old. But we were fortunate enough to have the Queen and open the newly renovated Canada House about 2 years ago, and we were fortunate enough last year to host her again. So it's a fantastic spot. And I have about 25 different trade commissioners working on the team. So we're there to handle questions from virtually any sector. But today I'm going to look, just follow a couple. So why the UK? Well, you know, frankly, everybody has a relative in the UK or a relative here or there. And I mean, we have a very long-standing tradition, rule of law, democracy, everything is, we're very, very well known to each other. It's a diverse, sophisticated economy. It's home to, I think it's home to many, many, many global firms, something like 25 Fortune 500 firms are headquartered in the UK. It's Canada's third largest destination for merchandise. We have a two-way trade valued at about $26 billion, $17 billion in Canadian exports. So it's a great market for us. Brexit, I'll talk about a little bit later, but there are some opportunities with Brexit. One of the key ones is it's turned the UK into this global Britain. The UK is really looking for partners, and they're looking to do business internationally with this new approach. And then more recently, they have a national infrastructure plan. They're planning on investing about 850 billion Canadian dollars over 20 years in a number of different sectors. Some of the priority sectors for us, certainly ICT is a priority sector in the UK. Out of 600 to 700 Canadian firms total based in the UK, almost a fifth or so are in the ICT sector. Many of them are small, but we also have some big ones as well. Telecom, again, there's a lot of infrastructure investment going on. Is a big area of opportunity. Internet of Things, like connected devices, smart cities, and of course we're seeing a lot of buzz around the AI and machine-to-machine connectivity as well. And then you have to consider that it's a very, very strong startup culture in the UK. There's tech clusters all over the place with a very active venture capital community. And it also has most of the IPOs in Europe are in the UK. Also, fintech, cybersecurity are big areas, and they're traditionally, of course, big growing areas for Canadian capabilities as well. The other one, clean tech. Priority sector for us. We're seeing a lot of interest in the UK, focus on being smarter and with flexible tech, batteries, and a lot of research and development going on there. Electric vehicles, autonomous vehicles, hydrogen fuel cells, lots of things in that area. So there's lots of opportunities for our companies there as well. Offshore renewable technology, we're seeing lots of interest, particularly, you know, I think areas for partnership, certainly in that area, because of our abilities and our companies over here who are getting lots of experience in that as well. I'm going to move quickly. Aerospace. Well, I mean, there's a lot to say about aerospace. Certainly, it's the largest player in Europe, second in the world after the U.S. Canada is very, very well represented. We have a number of aerospace firms. Large one like Bombardier, who's up in Belfast and doing the wings for the C series. And we have also the UK is a market with a very high reputation, and certainly in their expertise in engine design and production. The government's launched what they call this Aerospace Growth Plan. So again, more investment in that area. And because the UK is such a large player with 17% of global market share, there's lots of opportunities to access global supply chains there. You've heard a lot about the fish and seafood. Again, the UK is actually, I think it's the largest export destination for Canadian seafood in the EU. So we see a lot happening there. I can tell you since Ceta has come on board, what we're seeing is a couple of really good success stories and Michelle has mentioned it earlier as well, where species that we were not competitive are all of a sudden becoming competitive. So we're seeing, for example, redfish is the one, or ocean perch, I think it's called as well, that we're seeing some really good stuff happening. Again, we are seen to be a great supplier, and our team in the UK is we partner and we do a lot of work with everybody here in Atlantic Canada. I've done a number of Taste of Atlantic Canada promotions and shows and things. So again, it's a very strong market for us. So doing business, why you want to do business in the UK? Well, it's a global hub, as I mentioned, for a range of sectors. The government is pushing an ambitious low-carbon agenda. Demand for products, they do have demand for products at lower cost with improved efficiencies. So if you've got innovative products or services, they're early adopters and they will certainly take advantage of that. There are a few challenges. Industrial strategy that was just released in November. It's really focused on driving the domestic supply base. But that being said, because they're putting a lot of money associated with this industrial strategy, there are opportunities there. It's expensive. It's expensive to live in the UK. It's expensive to do business. So you have to make sure that you're willing to invest. And the Brexit question continues. I mean, there are some opportunities, but there's still additional uncertainty that we have to follow up on. How can Ceta? Well, I think we've seen all of this, the elimination of 98% of tariff lines. But for us, this enhanced access to the UK public procurement market is going to be a big opportunity. For example, SNC Lavalin recently purchased Atkins, a large engineering services firm in the UK, and they're getting themselves ready for both ways, access to the public procurement market, and specifically when the UK is investing all this money into infrastructure. Again, Ceta gives Canadian firms the advantage. So we've heard a lot of this before. Now, on Brexit. So nominal withdrawal date, so their last day in the EU is going to be March 29th, 2019. So basically on March 30th, they're going to be gone. At the moment, there's lots of talk about a transition deal, which would be 2, maybe 3 years to allow some of these agreements. We're not sure, but hopefully some of these agreements would continue beyond that point. I can tell you that we are working very closely with the UK government to set the foundation for a future bilateral relationship. If some of you recall when Prime Minister May went to Ottawa last September, actually just before Ceta, the Ceta came into force, they came out with a bunch of different things to do. One of them was the establishment of kind of a trade working group. And so the idea is to try to ensure as much as possible a seamless transition from Ceta to a bilateral relationship. Officially, we're not allowed to do trade negotiations, and we're not doing that. At the moment, we're looking at areas of commonality. And so as soon as they're able to, as soon as the UK is able to move ahead with their own free trade agreement, then we'll be in place to do it. So that kind of work is happening right now. And in addition, we signed a Memorandum of Understanding on Science, Technology, and Entrepreneurship. And that is actually opening up a lot of doors because the UK is looking for international research partners beyond the EU. And so we're seeing a lot of activity in that space which will trickle down to a number of different sectors. And that's my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Greg. We're now going to Ireland. John, our Senior Trade Commissioner at the Canadian Embassy in Dublin, is here. And he's also a second timer on part of this tour. I did an event with him in Toronto for the Canada-Ireland Chamber of Commerce back in October. It was my first presentation on Ceta, and he was very kind to only correct me after I left the stage for all of the mistakes that I made. But welcome, and over to you.
You can pronounce my name very well now, so all mistakes are ironed out. Good morning, everyone. Sanjeev said I'm John Roxburgh. I have a key message to share about the opportunities of working in Ireland. A lot of things that I've heard, and you just heard from Greg, there are a lot of similarities working in Ireland and the UK. Just the opportunities maybe are scaled down because the Irish market is much smaller. One of the other things that is scaled down is also the size of our embassy. We're 3 trade commissioners who help you in any and every industrial sector, so we're very happy to hear your inquiries and help you gain access in the Irish market. So in terms of why Ireland, again, as Greg was saying with the UK market, there's such strong historical ties and cultural ties, family ties with Ireland that doing business for Canadians in Ireland is actually quite easy, and a lot of Canadians find it kind of like working at home. It's a small but very wealthy and open economy. It's one of the 10 wealthiest countries in the world, which is quite astounding. You've probably heard the phrase, the Celtic tiger, how Ireland opened up its economy a few decades ago and grew at a rapid pace. You've heard of the problems post-2008 when the financial sector there collapsed. But probably not very well understood in Canada and around the world is how Ireland has really rebounded from that post-2008. It's leading the EU in growth over the past few years. It's reaching kind of maximum capacity in a lot of its infrastructure. It's one of the few countries in the EU where demographically it's growing, both from immigration and indigenously. Has a very highly educated workforce and has a lot of industrial priorities, which are very similar to Canada. So the Canadian technology companies who are working in the sectors that I'll speak about in a second, these are all also priorities in Ireland where they're building their economy. So first of all, in ICT, Ireland has a great success in attracting American FDI investment. Some of the global leaders, names you've heard of, like Microsoft and Intel, Apple, all have very substantial investments in Ireland. So if you're a firm that can sell technology or services into major multinationals, there is actually a large component of a supply chain that's run out of Ireland for exporting internationally that you can tap into with Ceta now. Ireland is pitching itself as kind of the internet capital of Europe, so companies like Facebook and LinkedIn and Google all have very substantial operations in Ireland to service a regional or a global market for certain areas. And Ireland, as I said, is a very educated workforce, and it has a very strong innovation infrastructure, so to work with Irish research institutions, for example, to localize your Canadian product or idea for an Irish or for a European market is a very good way to gain access. Infrastructure is really a huge in-demand sector in Ireland. Post-2008, the government had a lot of constraints on how it could spend, so Ireland's really emerging from a decade-long dearth of infrastructure development, and the government is starting to invest more and more now in meeting some of these critical needs. They invest about 6 billion euros a year in public infrastructure, and really they could use probably about 12 billion. But they are limited just because of the financial constraints of their bailout, that they can't run government deficits, so they're looking more towards PPP partnerships. So that's an opportunity for Canadian businesses to sell both within the infrastructure project, but also to invest if there are Canadian investors, and there are quite a few large pension funds that are now in the Irish market on that basis. In terms of Canadian companies, for a long time have had great success in the Irish building market. Canadian products are understood to be of very good quality, and they address a lot of the needs that are there in the Irish market for things such as energy, sustainability, high quality, new materials, that sort of thing. And as well, in areas such as engineering services, design, there's also a lot of collaboration. There's Irish investment in Canada and a lot of small Canadian companies who are coming to Ireland finding success. In clean tech, Ireland has a very substantial onshore wind farm base. They're starting to develop their offshore wind and ocean-based renewable energy, both tidal and wave. Here in Nova Scotia, you probably know DP Energy is one of the major Irish companies that's working in the Bay of Fundy. There's a lot of cooperation between institutions, between Canada and Ireland, and there's institutions like Smart Bay in Galway and Mara in Cork, which work with Canadian companies a lot. In terms of water and wastewater, Ireland is moving from a model where they had locally based, locally run utilities for water to a national utility. And so they're making a lot of upgrades as a part of that changeover. So there are great opportunities for Canada in the water and wastewater sector, and numerous types of things that for people in the sector would be familiar with, things like removing contaminants or extracting heat from wastewater, trenchless technologies, so you can restore pipes more efficiently and at a better cost. So some tips on doing business in Ireland. Again, as Greg was saying, the effect of Brexit and what it'll change for Canadian exporters in the UK market, but you also have to understand that Brexit will have a huge impact on the Irish market. The value chains are very closely internet between the UK and Ireland, so a lot of the major products that you see on the shelves in Ireland are actually come from UK distributors. Some of that fish and seafood that gets sold into the UK market is probably packaged and sold on the stores of grocery stores in Ireland. So we don't know what the terms of Brexit will be. We don't know if there will be any customs or duties or logistics constraints at the border. Ireland is very concerned, but from whatever does come from it, there very well may be greater opportunities for Canadian companies to get in there as potentially UK businesses are dislocated, or people's retail distribution model changes. Again, it's a market that really insists on high quality, but they do pay a high price to purchase competitive goods and services. So that's very beneficial for Canadian companies, but it's also something think about when you're entering the market. The high price means that it costs a lot if you're exploring opportunities to come over. If you go to the hotels and it costs in Dublin, the major cities, very, very, very high. The cost of employees is going up if you're making investments. In terms of infrastructure, again, if you're in the infrastructure sector, yes, there are business opportunities to be had, but for everyone, generally in the market, the infrastructure is actually a growing cost of doing business. The lack of housing means it's really hard to get employees who will work in Dublin or Cork or Galway, the major cities. But in the end, Dublin and the major cities do offer a very young, educated, technically proficient workforce. So if you're thinking of establishing sales offices or technical offices there, there's a lot of talent to draw upon. And finally, the component of how Ceta can help in the market, of course, there are a lot of the major export categories that we deal with both in exports and imports with Ireland, and many of them actually go both ways, so it shows that Canada and Ireland already have a very good global value chain in these areas, such as chemicals, machinery and equipment, and medical devices. The tariffs are totally eliminated in our major categories. Ireland offers a great and easy entry point now for the Canadians look to explore not just selling in the Irish market, but throughout Europe and even regionally to Mideast and North Africa. A lot of Canadian, even small-sized Canadian companies find Ireland as one of the least challenging markets for them to establish, gain that foothold, and start exploiting the opportunities that are there in the European Union. And finally, I guess it's worth pointing out that Ireland has a very intimate business relationship with the UK, but also with the US. The major FDI investors are Americans. Their two major export markets are the UK and the US. So the businesses that you're likely to deal with in Ireland are very used to North American business practices, business standards here. There's increasing direct air links between Canada and Ireland. So I think if you do come, and I hope you do, you'll find that there'll be a really warm Irish welcome for you, and I wish the best for you for much success there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John. We not only invited John because he's been on kind of one of these trips with me before, but we thought that his accent would add a little bit of a European flavor to the event today. That's an Irish accent. That's right. He is a Canadian diplomat, but I mean he's got an Irish accent. I don't know why. But the other thing we wanted to tell you is that he did mention that it's very expensive to stay in Ireland. In Dublin, but anybody that's registered today can stay at his house anytime you go over there. In fact, and when you come, that's right, Oswald, that's right. And you can also, when you come to Ottawa, you can stay at Francis's house if you need a place to crash as well. Samina is joining us actually for the second time on one of these tours. She'll be back again in March, going to Western Canada with me. We're going to
Alberta and Manitoba.
Alberta, Manitoba. We're actually touching every province before March 31st of this year on this roadshow. This is our first one, as I said, but she did part of the pilot with us, with Nicole. Where's Nicole Johnson Morrison from NSBI? Nicole organized an event for us in Sydney, Nova Scotia in November, and Samina called in by video conference from our Canadian Embassy in The Hague, and was a big hit, so we asked her to come back for the Atlantic tour, and as I said, she'll join me again in March. So Samina, thanks for coming back, but this time in physical presence. Over to you, and then after her presentation, we'll have time for a couple of questions before we start the next panel. Samina.
Okay, thank you, Sanjeev. Good morning, everybody, or I think it's good mid-morning. I'm really pleased to be here. I've been posted in the Netherlands for about a year and a half now, and in my last posting, that was in the Czech Republic, and that's when the Ceta negotiations got launched back in 2009, and I was really pleased, after a number of years, it's now in provisional application. So what I would like to do, and how many minutes do I have, Sanjeev? 7 to 10. Okay, all right, great. Tell you about the Netherlands. And so first off, why? Well, the Netherlands is one of our most important trade and investment and innovation partners. So in terms of trade, the 2016 figure of bilateral merchandise trade was about $6.5 billion. And the Dutch are the second largest investors in Canada. As well, there's a very vibrant innovation and technology exchange. There's a number of Canadian and Dutch research projects going on at any time. And one thing that's, that's really struck me is just how much activity there is between Canada and the Netherlands. And of course, we've got very strong historical and cultural ties, and that's due to Canada's role in the liberation of the Netherlands in World War II. And there are, I think, over 1 million Canadians of Dutch heritage. So it never ceases to amaze me. I'll be in some small town or some place in the Netherlands, and people say, where are you from? And I'll say, well, I'm originally from Alberta. I've lived all over Canada. And they'll say, oh, I was just in, and they'll mention some very, very particular kind of places that I've never been to, never even heard of, and that's where their cousins are. So like my colleagues here, everyone's got a relative, and yeah, it just never ceases to amaze me. The Dutch are very, very strong supporters of Ceta, being a trading nation, and they continue to show their support. And their economy did very well last year, amongst the top in the EU, with about a 3.3% GDP growth. And the Netherlands, you can see on that map there, it's of course the orange country just on the left of Germany. It is the gateway to continental Europe, and the port of Rotterdam receives about 25% of Canadian exports to the EU. And Netherlands is truly an excellent logistics transportation infrastructure, whether that's rail, road, and port. There's a very international business climate in the Netherlands. The embassy estimates there are 160 Canadian firms active there. There's a very skilled multilingual workforce, and again, I think Dutch people speak very, very good English and usually a couple of other languages. And of course, there's a competitive 25% corporate tax rate. So that's an overview. Now I'd like to tell you about a few sectors of interest. And I'll start with ICT. The Netherlands is a very, very connected country. Their internet penetration is something like 97% of households, and people are very active in terms of online shopping, online banking. ICT, it's a very large sector, and the turnover was about $60 billion in 2016. That's about 6% of their GDP. And the Dutch really are leaders in areas such as fintech, regtech, something I recently learned about, all the cyber security that goes around fintech. And as I mentioned, online banking, online shopping. I'm really impressed, people there, they don't, they do go to stores, but they don't really have, let's say, Amazon there. They've got their own, it's called bowl.com, and I'm always surprised. I'll meet someone and say, oh, where did you get that? And they order it online. It's there. I mean, they have really, really fast timelines of delivery, and it's just the expectation there, very sophisticated market, and they really do rely on that. And ICT is one of the most innovative sectors. Wi-Fi and Bluetooth were invented by Dutch individuals. And the Dutch, they're early adopters of new technologies. So it could be an interesting test bed if companies are looking to get into Europe and try out their technologies in the Dutch market. And in the Netherlands, you will find the largest cyber and security hub. And in that regard, what I wanted to mention for any companies, SMEs that might be interested, we offer, together with some partners, it's called a soft landing program. So the Embassy of Canada, the Dutch Embassy, together with some local partners, the Hague Security Delta, we offer a program whereby an SME could come and they can either virtually land or they can physically set up there at the Hague Security Delta for a few weeks or a few months. And there they have access to, it's a hub, it's a community of companies, about 400 Dutch and international companies in cyber and security. And as well, there's the possibility for mentorship. So it's something we're promoting as well. Dutch companies can also, they can also soft land in Ottawa. So if anybody has questions about that, please come and see me during the Export Cafe. Now, another area I'd like to talk about is clean tech. The Dutch have set some ambitious renewable energy targets domestically. As well, they have targets at the EU level. And by 2023, there's something called the Dutch Energy Accord, which is going to require that the 16% of Dutch renewable energy use is in place. And they seem so far on track to meet that. And in this regard, the government has budgeted $18 billion in subsidies for renewable energy projects, and they're going to be launching 2 calls for projects this year in March and in October. Offshore wind farms are also in the pipeline, and of course, any technologies to lower costs are welcome. Now, I've got to say, the Dutch renewable market, it is very mature. It's innovative. They themselves have great, of course, wind energy, windmills and such, as well as technologies for capturing and converting waste gases and the conversion of biomass to bioenergy and bioproducts. But that being said, if a Canadian company has an innovative technology that they're looking for, that's always welcome. I can think of 2 examples of companies, Canadian ones, active in the Netherlands, that are working in the recovery of nutrients from wastewater and also disinfection of wastewater. So though it's in itself an innovative area, there's always room. The Dutch are always interested in innovation. Now, agri-food and seafood. You've already heard a lot of information this morning from my fellow panelists and our speakers, and I wanted to tell you a few interesting points here. The Netherlands is the largest agri-food trading hub in Europe, and so that means it's a real point of connection for agri-food investors as well as distributors and importers. And they are, and this was something I've learned since I've been there, the 2nd largest exporter of agri-food worldwide. So they import, in certain cases, the raw materials, process, and then re-export. And the Netherlands is the 3rd largest market for Canadian agri-food in Europe. And so what are they importing? A range of agri-food items such as wheat, soybeans, pulses, cranberries, and blueberries. And on the seafood, frozen and live lobster, fish oils, and processed shrimp. And I remember the first week I was in The Hague, that's where our embassy is, I went out for dinner at a seafood restaurant, and it was great. I opened up the menu, and they had a list of things, and it actually said Canadian lobster. And I thought, like that. They're specifying. And we're seeing an increased consumption of fish and seafood by Dutch people in the last few years. So the Netherlands definitely punches above its weight in agribusiness, and the distributors and buyers are purchasing for Europe as well as global markets. And I'd just like to share with you just a little anecdote about the eagerness of a certain importer of Canadian seafood. When we thought that the provisional application would take place in July, this gentleman had already brought in a lot of frozen seafood from Canada, and he had it stored in a bonded warehouse, frozen, just waiting for the tariffs to be eliminated. So I thought that's eagerness, and so that tells you something about the market. If there's an opportunity, the Dutch will be there. So eventually he did get to clear his shipment. That was more in, I think, September 21st. And we're really pleased. We've had a few delegations last year from Atlantic Canada, a couple of representatives of NSBI, so there's a real interest. And myself and my team, we're 7 altogether. We look forward to working with you. And next week, or I think it might be the week after, the Agriculture Minister from Nova Scotia, Mr. Colwell, will be visiting the Netherlands with a delegation of growers that are interested in innovative greenhouse technologies and materials. Now, just a reference to green building. This is a niche area where we see some potential with the European trend towards sustainable building construction. The Dutch are looking at tall wood building design, and there is a need for expertise there, both in architecture and engineering. That building you see on the slide, it hasn't been built yet, but it's called the Hout building in Amsterdam, and it's going to be the tallest wood frame construction, 21 stories for residential and commercial use. So in terms of doing business in the Netherlands, as I said, they're very interested in Canada, specifically, I mean, right now what I'm aware of, a lot of interest in seafood and agri-food. But I would say have a strong value proposition, visit the market, follow up, perhaps come on a trade mission. As I mentioned, we had some new exporters come through last year. We're looking forward to more. And definitely follow up. The Dutch are very, very strong on following up. If there is some kind of a connection made, good to repeat your visit to the market, or they will come to see you. And it is a good test market if you're looking at continental Europe, English is spoken and there's a very similar business culture. And I will say, again, as my colleagues have said, Ceta can really help you in certain areas. Of course, we've heard about agri-food and seafood, but ICT and across the board. And as well, I wanted to mention labor mobility. I know we're going to hear some more about that, but if you're, for example, providing services, the possibilities under Ceta can facilitate that as well. So that's just a little bit of an overview, covering everything from cybersecurity to lobster. But as I said, my team and I were really interested, and we're there as part of our international network to assist you with your perhaps first time foray into the Netherlands or expansion of what you're doing there. So
thank you very much, Samina. Well, it's almost been like we've had a trip across Europe having all of these great senior trade commissioners. We didn't have to pay for it, which was even better. Thank you very much. That was fantastic. We're about 3 to 4 minutes over schedule right now, but we're going to take a couple of questions. If you do have an appointment scheduled with one of the senior trade commissioners, please don't ask that question again here, because you're going to have your one-on-one during the Export Cafe. And as Kathy mentioned, there are still some slots available, and after you've heard these 4 excellent presentations. I'm not leaving you out on purpose, Francis. It's because the European ones were very, very interesting, and that's why we brought these guys in here from Europe to talk to you. If you still want to meet some of them, there are some slots available, and I think they sign up with right outside at the registration desk, so you still have a chance to meet one of these senior trade commissioners in person if you want. But if you do have a question, we'll take 2 only, so that we don't run too far over schedule. You have to speak into the microphone because we are live streaming. There are people tuning in all across Europe to watch this event today, so we want to make sure that they. This is now rating number 2 after Europe's Got Talent, so we've got to make sure that we can hear us. Does anybody have a question, or shall we move on to the next panel? If you do, put up your hand. We have one way there in the corner, and Alexandre is going to take the microphone over there.
Thanks kindly. We're looking at a partnership in Germany. Could you just give us a 1-minute hit on Canada's feeling about doing business with Germany?
We've had Jason Tolland with us. He's the Senior Trade Commissioner in Berlin, and he's been with us on our first pilot trip with Greg Houlihan, and we did that across Ontario, Quebec, and we came to Sydney, Nova Scotia, Jason and myself. I would recommend maybe Nicole, we can send him some of those. Nicole Johnson-Morrison from NSBI organized this session in Sydney, which was absolutely fantastic, and that's where we got the idea to kind of, we fine-tuned our presentations here based on that. But I think Jason's comments at that event in Sydney, which happened in November, might be of help to you, and we can share those with you. But basically, very bullish on Canada-German cooperation. We have, as we speak right now, our Chief Trade Commissioner, Dr. Ailish Campbell, our boss, is in Munich today with John Manley, with the Business Council of Canada, and Minister Champagne, meeting with German business leaders, and the kind of activities that are happening around this Business Council of Canada group, which Mr. Manley heads, our minister, and Dr. Campbell is exactly to promote Canada-German business ties. We are very, very positive on this market. Which is obvious because you have these 3 heavy hitters in Germany today as we speak, which is why Jason is not here, but he will be joining us again in February. But I would recommend that you look at some of the notes that Nicole sent us from that event in Sydney in November. But he's very bullish on this. We have great relationships with our German counterparts. Jason's got a big team there. And I think the proof is in the pudding. So the fact that we have 3 of our senior Canadian officials and a former official, Mr. Manley, in Germany today just proves the point that that's what we're looking to expand.
We might want to also note that outside of Berlin, the capital, there's also consulates in Munich and Dusseldorf. So there's a very good geographic spread in Germany.
Yeah, in fact, we have, in Europe, we have 28 points of service, the Canadian Trade Commissioner Service. We have 28 points of service. That was on Francis's slide. The only country where we have 3 offices is Germany. So we're physically present in 25 EU countries. But we say we have 28 points of service because we have 3 in Germany and 2 in Spain. So the fact that we have so many offices in Germany, I think is another, thank you, Greg, is another testament to the fact that we have a great relationship with Germany. We have time for one last question, and then we're going to go to the next panel. Alexandre.
I'd be interested in learning some of the advocacy efforts of the trade offices for Canadian companies accessing public procurement throughout Europe.
Okay. I can give a very general overview of that, but if anybody wants to add to that, is there anybody that has something to say on that on the panel? You can think about it for one moment. But I will tell you, we are doing our guide to doing business in the EU that I showed you on our webpage lays this out. But basically, what we have is we are training all of our trade commissioners in Canada and in Europe on public procurement and on Ceta in general. Last week, we finished our cross-Canada tour for trade commissioners based in Canada. And it was headed up by our superstar Canadian diplomat who's based in Belgium, in Brussels. He works for the Free Trade Agreement Promotion Task Force in Ottawa, and he happens to be the husband of Michelle Cooper here. I've named her the first lady of the tour. He is watching. He is watching live, and I told him I was going to put in a plug for him, so that's why I had to mention his name. What we did, sir, was we went to Vancouver, Calgary, Toronto, and Halifax last week. And we did training for all of our trade commissioners, and part of that training was on public procurement. Next week, we start the exact same training program in Europe. Every one of these offices will participate with all of their trade staff in the same training program, and part of that, again, is on public procurement. So what we do is we send people to a website called ted.europa.eu. That is the public procurement site. It's equivalent to what our former Public Works and Government Services Canada website would be. And you can register. You have to register. You have to create an account. And ted.europa.eu. It's in many different languages. Of course, we use the English version. You can go in there and see all of the public procurement contracts that are available. Some of them, like the vast majority, are open for bidding by Canadian companies. There are some thresholds. For example, we are trying to protect the SME community in Canada and in Europe. So we have a minimum threshold for the contract value that you can bid on to allow SMEs to bid on a number of these contracts and not face competition from large corporations. But in general, the vast majority of these public procurement contracts are open to Canadian firms. You really have to play around in the system. JP Lemire, Michelle's husband, who did the training for us last week, showed us a bunch of different cases where you have to go in and you really have to create your account and see what's there, what you might be interested in bidding on. And then, of course, you can always work through one of our trade commissioners based here or at our embassy to get more information. But the website is open. All you have to do is register, and our trade commissioners within the next 3 weeks or 4 weeks in Europe will be completely up to speed on it. Kathy Alliong here in Halifax had her training session a week ago Friday, and all of her trade staff were trained in it. In addition, we opened it up to every province, and they sent 2 representatives. We had NSBI there. We had Opportunities New Brunswick there. We had Newfoundland. They flew in. We did not have people from PEI. They were invited but could not attend. But we opened it to all of our provincial partners as well across the country. So people are more or less familiar with the system now, and especially here in Canada. So you can go in and make an appointment with Kathy if you're based here in Halifax, and she can walk you through the system. Yeah. Greg?
Yeah, I would just add specifically in the UK, I have an officer who's only responsible for infrastructure, and so he's constantly looking at the procurement opportunities within the UK, and also we have good contact with the devolved administration, so Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland. So we are able to provide information and advocate on behalf of companies and provide the opportunities. I'm also in the midst, actually, of engaging an officer who's going to be focusing on climate finance opportunities, and because we in London have the home of the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, we also have inroads there to look at procurement opportunities throughout the member states who are members of the EBRD. So there's a number of different ways that we can go about that.
We have a comment from ACOA as well here. Go ahead.
I would just like to note that the Atlantic Canada Chamber of Commerce also completed a study on procurement opportunities for Atlantic Canadian companies that you can find on their website. So that would be very helpful for anyone looking at that.
Great, thanks for pointing that out.
Okay. It is my pleasure to introduce the moderator for the next panel, which is a focus on services trade into the European Union. Mr. David Plunkett is the former Canadian ambassador to the European Union. And this time I actually have a full bio, so it's a very strong bio for Mr. Plunkett. He holds a BA in political science from the University of British Columbia, and then followed that up with an MA in international relations from the University of Nijmegen in the Netherlands. As I said, he was the ambassador to Canada, the ambassador of Canada to the European Union from 2011 to 2015. He joined the Department of Foreign Affairs and International Trade in 1981, first as a trade policy officer. Then from 1987 to 1991, he was counselor at the Permanent Mission of Canada to the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade in Geneva. In his work abroad, he was also counselor for trade policy at the Embassy of Canada in Washington from 1993 to 1997, and Minister Counselor Economic in London from 2002 to 2006. In Ottawa, he was Deputy Director of the U.S. Trade Policy Division from 1991 to 1993, and the Director of the European Union Division from 1998 to 2001. Needless to say, there's a lot of experience to be had from listening to Mr. Plunkett, so I look forward to his comments and the other comments from this panel, and introduce you, Mr. David Plunkett.
Good morning. It's a real pleasure to be here again. I'm really pleased to have this opportunity to introduce Pascal Canis, who is the Managing Director of the European Services Forum. I'm not going to read his extensive bio. It's set out in the package for you. Other than to say that when I got to Brussels in 2011, Pascal was one of the first people that came to see me in the context of the ongoing Ceta negotiations, and we touched base throughout the 4-year period there, not just on Ceta, but he was also extensively involved with the US-EU negotiations, the so-called TTIP, which seems to have gone off the rails, at least for the time being. So all this to say that you couldn't get a better speaker to describe what is going on in the services area than Pascal. He'll describe to you what the European Services Forum is, its role, and the importance of the EU services market, and how Ceta has changed things indefinitely to the better. And both during this panel and during the Export Cafe later, he'll be able to discuss any particular opportunities and questions you may have in this area. Services is an important area, and it's important that when you're talking about the services area, you also need to be looking within the Ceta in terms of things like temporary entry, domestic regulations, mutual recognition of professional qualifications. There are specific provisions on telecommunications, electronic commerce. It is a complex area, for sure, but I don't think there's anybody who can describe it better than Pascal. And by the time you leave here, you will actually understand the differences between Mode 1 and Mode 2 and Mode 3, et cetera, et cetera. Before turning over the floor, while there's been a lot of important talk about trade in goods, in fact, services makes up 70% of both the EU and Canadian economies. In 2015, service industry employed more than 12.7 million Canadians. And so when you're starting to look at statistics and the impact on the economy, you would be vastly underestimating the extent of the economic impact if you don't properly analyze the services area. It was just sort of shown, I think, how old I am by listing all the things that I have done in the past. One of the things that I did early in my career was I was a delegate to the Canadian delegation to the so-called Uruguay round, which ultimately became the World Trade Organization, which still is the main instrument guiding multilateral trade. In those days, which was in the late 80s, services was one of the so-called new issues that was brought into the Uruguay round. And the first few months, few years, the negotiators didn't even have a clue as to how to look at these areas in the context of a trade negotiation. So we've come from sort of being added on to the multilateral trading community in terms of a negotiation to now making up over 70% of the economy. So there's been a huge swing over the years. We are strong in areas where the EU, where there's EU demand. I noted that both Greg, John, and Samina all highlighted ICT as a priority sector. Infrastructure was noted in Ireland, green build in Holland. So while it is important to focus on things like seafood and agriculture and whatnot, don't overlook these important areas. And with that, I'm going to turn the floor over to Pascal, and hope I didn't scoop him too badly.
Thank you, David, and thank you for the invitation for having me here. I'm going to try to drive you in the world of services. Also, most of you are in the services but don't know, and I'm going to try to convince you about this. So what I'm going to try to do, I have a long list of slides because I thought that it would be good for you to have the possibility to have the information by yourself later on. I'm going to go through this quickly, but if you want to get a time then to read after that, you could do it later. I'm going to show you what is quickly very ESF, the trade in services and investment in figures, and then showing you that services is more than what you would understand by services, i.e. banking and telecom and professional services, and much more than that. And then I will go through what is in Ceta for services. So, I am a lobbyist, and my organization is a lobby. We are representing companies' interest for international trade negotiations. And we made this organization because agriculture world is very well organized. Manufacturing companies are very well organized into a trade association, and we're 28 countries, and therefore you have to go through the national levels. But services were nowhere in terms of international trade, and the negotiators could go to one room to brief all the agriculture people, could go to one room to brief all the manufacturing people, and they had to go to 30 different rooms. So I have 30 different associations in 30 different services sectors, who many of them actually don't know what they are actually services. Because if you talk to a retailer, he's going to consider himself as the importer and exporter of goods. And if you go to construction companies, he's going to say, of course I'm not services. Construction is something you can see in concrete. Well, actually, it's construction services, and they are into these sectors. And if we want to talk about international trade, negotiations, it's one package for all the services sectors. This is where then we convince our members to come together and bring their interests. So you can see here some names of services sectors: insurance, banking, business services, professional services, construction, distribution, etc. And I will go through this along my presentation. Here are also logos of my members, some multinational companies, and not only European, but multinational companies, because we are talking about global companies willing to export from the EU. And here are some of the logos of the association. So European sector-specific association like European bankers, European satellite, European telecom operators, European construction companies, all of that are based into European association member of ESF. We all know that services is representing a very big part of our GDP, and for EU is about 73%, and for Canada is 70.8%. So why, when we talk about international trade, we always come up talking about agriculture, agriculture, and agriculture again. Maybe a bit of cars and textile. And I'm going to try to show you why. First of all, maybe some figures saying that the EU is by far the biggest exporter of services, and that is the reason why my organization is very strong in pushing for the negotiations. Because if you look at your figures of Canada export to the rest of the world, you will have US, Germany, UK, you will not find the EU. When we talk about export, it is a second column. EU extra export is about 915 billion euros per year, dollars per year. But normally you also have to see the trade between the European countries if you do consider we take the national countries' statistics. Canada is also a very big exporter of services. It's the 10th in the world. But you can see that the EU is far beyond. And that is the reason why when we talk about international trade, the European Union countries know that there is no point to sign an agreement if there is no big chapter on services and concession on services. When we talk about export of services, usually for the last 20 years, it's first travel and then transport. So tourism, if you wish, and transport used to be more than 60% of international trade in services export. But nowadays, it has completely changed, and the biggest export that we do is business services. And actually, the biggest figure is any other business services, which is appalling that actually a huge chunk of our export, we don't even know what it is. We know exactly how many watches or how many lobsters would be exported, but we don't know about a large point of figures. 27.5% is business services. But I'm going to try to come back to this later on to show that actually we now have better idea. So here is the evolution. You can see in 95, travel and transportation in red and in green were about 60% of all the EU exports. And nowadays it is exactly the reverse. We export 60% of business services, and travel and tourism is 40%. So you can see that business services is growing, also commercial services is growing. That is the export of goods and export on trade and services. You can see that actually the export of goods is, of course, yet, because we talk about balance of payment, bigger than export of services. But when we will go more into the details, it's actually going to be a bit different. More importantly is the trend. I started to look at these figures in 2009 because that was the beginning of the negotiation of Ceta. And you can see that in the meantime, you have got a significant growth of export from the EU to Canada and from Canada to the EU, even before Ceta was applied. I'm saying to show you here, and we will of course now follow up and monitor the trend in the coming years, but the fact that two countries are negotiating a trade agreement is already giving a significant signal to the business that these conditions are going to improve. And I think it's a trade agreement is, I used to say, is like a one-page advertising in the Financial Times to say our market is open. Even if nothing changed, the fact that you have a call to the exporter and investors, it is making already an impact. When we talk about export of services, we are missing a very large part of what services companies do. A very important part of the services activity of a company is actually to go access to the international market, is to go to the country, establish itself, and get on the local market. That's called foreign direct investment. The foreign direct investment are not into the trade figures I showed you before. But this is our best way to export. The problem is you need to have an international trade agreement to open the market. But once it is open and that a company would have chosen and taken this opportunity, it will not export. It will be part of the local GDP. If a French company is coming here and establishing in Halifax and getting access to a subsidiary, it will become a Canadian company doing business to Canadian customers. It will not export. But without the Ceta to open up the market, maybe that company would not have access to it. So, and a difficult angle of showing what it is important in trade and services to have concession in a trade agreement is because it is part of international foreign direct investment. Here you have the figures of the outward and inward. If you look at the second column, you can see that 87% of all inward investment coming to the EU is actually in services sectors. Of course, it is not making the headlines of the news saying that there is a new car plant or a new Bombardier establishing blah, blah, something which is visible for the camera. But investment, foreign direct investment, the large bulk is coming into the services sectors, and we are also a big investor here or everywhere else in the world, as a matter of fact. These are the foreign direct investment figures, which is showing you that Canada is also a very big exporter of investment, if you wish, i.e. foreign direct investment coming to the rest of the world and into the EU. 3% of all investment coming to the EU is coming from Canada. So, in terms of balance of payment, the EU is exporting to Canada 34% of all our export are services. And 28.8% of all Canadian export to the EU are services. So it's not only about goods, but it is not the majority, clearly, in terms of balance of payment. But now I'm going to try to drive you to the notion of what we called Mode 5, or a new word invented by Swedish colleagues from National Board of Trade, is servicification. Is to try to show you that actually when you are into mining, when you are into fishing, when you are into agriculture, when you are into manufacturing of cars or textile of machinery, you are also exporting, or you are also into the services business. This is what we call the services around the products. Because in all good manufacturing or agriculture, whatever companies, in addition to the services themselves, you have embodied services and you have embedded services. I'm not going to go too much into the details here, but it is saying that if you want to be efficient into exporting your lobsters, you need to have a good lawyer, you need to have a good banker, you need to have a good legal accounting services, which is part of your efficiency, so that you're going to be able to focus on your primary task, which is fishing and which is whatever you do. And that is services embedded into, embodied, into what you're doing. And then many companies, when you export a plane, when you export a train, when you export a car, you also export a lot of services around these products. And now a train probably will have to make a discount to get the market on the machine itself. But you will find then that you will make a market for 20 years contract of maintenance and repair. And this is where the money is. And maintenance and repair is a service. So if we look at this smiley that maybe some of you know, this slide, it's about the life of the product, and it starts with a very high value into, first you need to get the idea, you need to have research and development, you need to have designing and engineering, etc., before starting to produce your product, to manufacturing, to assemble it, and then you need to sell it. And there you need also additional services. You need logistics, you need branding, advertising in cars, for instance, a lot of advertising. Then you need to have customer services, so after-sale services, a garage, etc. All of that is service. But when you export a goods, when you export a car, at the border, in the balance of payment figures we've seen earlier, it's 100% a good. So it appears in the other side, but actually, if you take the steel, the rubber, the plastic, and whatever you have as a raw material into a car, it's maybe 10% of the value of the car. All the rest is services. Now, our colleagues in the European Commission are saying Mode 5 is actually services around the products, but when the negotiators are negotiating on the goods, a car is a good, and therefore when you cross the border, if there is a tariff, you pay a tariff on the totality of the car. While actually you're not supposed to pay duties on services. This is now a new thinking. Why should we pay a tariff on a service? You're not supposed to do that. You pay duty only on a good. But I'm not going to go too down into this because it's going to drag too long. But now the OECD and the WTO have found a new way to calculate the services around the products. So here you have the figures. For the EU, 39.9% of all the value of the goods that the EU is exporting is actually services around the products. And the figure for Canada is 34%. So 34% of all your goods which are exported to the world are actually services around the products, which is a very significant amount of money. So this is the summary of making the distinction between balance of payment and trade in value added, this new database that OECD and WTO have developed, where you can now find figures where are the services around products. So worldwide, in terms of balance of payment, the EU is exporting 31.5% of all its export are services. But when we include the services around the products plus the traditional services, so the banking, the telecom, etc., we go to 58%. 58% of all the export of the EU are actually services. And for Canada, it's 28.8% in balance of payment, 44.8% of all export of Canada in terms of value added are services. This is now a picture which allows us to have a complete different way in thinking our trade policy, which should maybe not only focus on trade and agriculture and trade in manufacturing products, because the money, the value of the country of export and the money for the companies who export are actually services also, and services around the products. So that is my introduction for all the different figures. Now let's go in terms of how do you negotiate trade in services? You know, it's not like for the goods where you focus on reducing the tariff, you focus to try to have rules of origin as clear as possible. We've heard all of that earlier on. You try to have the certification and standards as better as you can. So that is for the trade in goods. For services, not at all like this. You have to find a different way. So in this slide, I tried to summarize what are the different ways of companies to export a service. You have 4 modes, 4 ways. The red line is a border between country A and country B. First, you have what we call cross-border supply. The company is in country A, the customer is in country B. None of these are going to move, and the service is going to be provided either by someone else, i.e. a shipping company is going to transport the goods for you, or you're going to have an electronic commerce transaction. You don't move, the customer is not moving, someone is going to travel the goods for you, but the transaction is done across the border without nobody moving. So that's cross-border supply. The mode 2 is called consumption abroad. The company in country A is not moving. It's going to be the customer, i.e. the tourist, who is going to move from country B to country A to come and consume the service of the company. And I can tell you a very large majority of these people don't know they export. This hotel, when I pay my bills this morning, has exported hotel services. And if you go to a restaurant, it's the same. This also is the case for the medical services when people is going to come to another country and be cured there. Or for university when your children are going to move to another country and pay the tuition fee in a university. So that is export of services that the university maybe doesn't know, but it actually does export. This is mode 2. The mode 3 is what I mentioned to you earlier about the foreign direct investment. It's a commercial presence abroad. Country A, country B, company A, company B. Company A is actually going to move in the country B to establish itself, create a subsidiary, create a joint venture, buy a company or complete greenfield investment. and set down into that country to have access to the consumers of that country. So that is commercial presence abroad. You need to make sure that there is no barriers. So the negotiations are necessary, but actually it's not going to be increasing the export, except maybe after 5 or 10 years, when this company is going to grow up, is going to establish itself, is going to maybe make some benefit, and after a point in time, the headquarters is going to say, that's good, but now, you know, all the money I gave you at the beginning, you have to send back also some company back to the shareholders. And the money will cross back, and therefore that might be part of the benefit of the trade agreement. But it will not be part of the international trade in services. And finally, the mode 4 is what we call the movement of natural persons. But don't forget, it is part of international trade in services. It's about trade in services, and therefore it is not about migration. It is not about employment. Here we're talking about country A, country B. The company from country A has got a contract with a company from country B, and the way to fulfill this contract is actually to send someone from the company to go to the other country, make the service for 2 weeks, for 6 months, or for 2 years, and come back. That is movement of natural person or mobility of employees, if you wish. We're going to come back later on. So I'm not going to go more into this, except maybe that the mode 1 is very much also about cross-border data flow. Everything today in manufacturing and everywhere, digital manufacturing, Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, all those machine-to-machines, it is about data. If there is something in a legislation providing data to flow freely, it is going to be an impediment to cross-border data trade, to data flow, and therefore is going to be making things more complicated, more costly for companies. I'm not going to go too much into this. You heard this morning about the HS code. So for the goods, any single good has an HS code. If I want to export this remote control, it has an HS code. Well, for services also, it is not well known, but all services are also have a code. Here it's a 2,000 pages document, but the WTO has found a way to summarize it into 20 pages and 12 chapters, which are the headlines of what we are. And that is helping the negotiators from 2 countries. When we talk about integrated engineering services, if they want to know exactly what they want to talk about, they can agree that this is effectively what we're talking about, and therefore we can use this number. Because otherwise, you know, you can negotiate something and then suddenly you believe you understand that it is not talking about exactly the same thing. So that is the way that the trade negotiators are going to understand each other well. Contrary to services, to goods, there are many ways of negotiating access to trade in services. And that is making things even more complicated. We have a positive list, and that means the negotiator is going to say, for banking access to whatever specific sector, service, if they don't list that HS code or whatever you want to name it, it means that this services is not committed. So on the positive list, only what is written is going to be committed. The negative list, which is what in the Ceta has been used between the EU and Canada, for the first time for the EU, it is exactly the reverse. Everything is open except what is not open, i.e. what is not conform to the fact that it is open. Well, that's the reason why we call the conforming measures, non-conforming measures. And that is, i.e. only restrictions are listed. And to make things even easier, the EU has invented a new one, which is called the hybrid list, established for the TISA negotiation, trade and services negotiation in Geneva, with some 20 countries, which is a mix of 2, and which is making things a hell of a job to understand and to make it work for companies. But that is, unfortunately, what we have to go through. So for trade in services negotiations, you have 3 components. First, you have the chapters, in which you're going to write the disciplines for all for the 2 parties. Then And you will not be able to understand the commitment if you do not read the 3 parts. They are all integrated, and if you read only the chapter, or if you read only the annex, you will not get it. So you need to have the chapter in cross-border services, in movement of natural person, in domestic regulation. I have the list later on. Then you have the annexes, which contain unilateral declaration, so things, most of the time, actually exception to the rules, and therefore that's the reason why you need to go through this. And then you have the schedule of commitments. The schedule of commitments is that each party is listing the restriction here when we talk about negative list. In a summary, this is what the OECD has produced at, is what they call the lake. It's the difference between what the committed level by the countries in the, David mentioned the WTO negotiation, the GATS, the General Agreement on Trade in Services. So that was 1999, and for financial services and telecom in 97. And what is the practice? Because some countries have not committed under an international trade agreement, i.e. under international law, but actually are practicing better regulation for foreigners. They say, we have done a reform, we think it's good for foreigners to have access to a country, and therefore we're going to make it easier for them. But it is not bound into an international treaty. This lake shows you the difference in terms of applied and bound tariff, if you wish, for the services sectors. And this gives us the opportunity to understand that some countries are more liberal than others, and some countries have made things. So you can see that a lot of work to be done. For Canada, the space is still relatively wide between the practice and the commitment into the GATS. So the whole exercise of Ceta was actually to reduce the blue space here. So what is it now for services in Ceta? These are the guidelines, so there is no need to go through this. What I was saying at the beginning is saying that trade in services, normally I would look only at the second line. But actually, my organization is looking at all what's happening in all the sectors, also essentially everything in red, because we are interested in much more than what is in trade in services, only because we're also interested in investment, in data flow, in public procurement, in regulatory cooperation, etc. For the trade in services, you have the market access pillar. Then you need to go to the regulatory cooperation, whether you will be able, by the 2 parties, agree to go further after the negotiations, and then we will have a look at the movement of natural person and mutual recognition. So these are the chapters for services: cross-border trade in services, temporary entry, mutual recognition, domestic regulation, financial services, international maritime transport, telecom, and electronic commerce. These are the links of the different annexes, which you will need to go through also. So if you would get access to my slides at a point in time, there is a link to all of these chapters, so you can have more information on that. And these are the annexes. So the annexes is a schedule of commitments where Canada and the EU will list the restrictions. Canada has decided to have first the federal level and then the different provinces and territories, so you would know what it is not possible to do in Canada. So for businesses and for companies, a negative list approach is much better, much easier to understand, because you will find exactly what is not possible, and then there is a reference to the legislation which is telling you what you cannot do, and all the rest you can. So that's, you don't need to hire a lawyer, which is a service, to better understand all of these things. And the EU did the same. Canada wanted to have a specific way of doing for the financial services. The EU considers the financial services is a service like any others, but Canada and US and many other countries in the world have a specific way of doing for financial services. So this is why Canada has Annex 3 and we don't. In these annexes, you will find exactly what it is not possible to do, for instance, for financial services in Canada. This is a slide where I have listed all the sectors where the EU has given something to Canada, which is an improvement to what the EU gave to the GATS, so to the WTO. So you can see that the EU made some efforts to do something. I will not go through all the details because it's going to take years and hours at least, but that is where all the services that the EU gave something to Canada. Those at the lower part of the slide are services that the EU didn't make improvement, but actually is not making any improvement to any country in the world. We're negotiating with more than 20 countries now. Health services, education services, social and health, all of those sectors are very sensitive in the EU, are actually public services, and therefore we don't take commitments. That's the reason why I put a specific slide on public services, where the EU and Canada have made some specific provision to protect these services, and therefore they are not open to international competition. The EU has 3 layers of protection. First of all, you have the government authorities, the services which are done by the government. So that is defense, police, justice, etc. Then you have the public monopolies and concession, where the EU is going to give either the public service are not competing at all with a private sector, or are giving concession to one company and it is not open to competition. But then you have many services where actually the public services are competing with the private service. And how can you protect the public service when they are supposed to compete? Well, the EU found a way to express this into a trade agreement, saying that everything which is funded by a public authority are not considered as open to the competition. Public procurement and investment protection, quickly to say that many times people believe that public procurement is actually buying a car or buying a desk for the officials. But the bulk of the money that the government and public authorities are spending are actually into services. They need energy, they need telecom, they need banking, they need lawyers, accounting, they need clearing services, catering services. All of that is services. Plus, even if in public procurement it is divided into a third category, called works or construction or infrastructure, everything related to building highway, energy, plant, public nuclear plant, etc. These are actually construction services, architect services, energy, engineering-related services. So all of those services are also part of the public procurement. That's the reason why our companies are very eager to look at whether progress has been achieved into the public procurement chapter and annexes. Investment protection, I told you that for us we invest very much also, so investment protection is very important for us. I will skip all of this. Regulatory cooperation is something very important, but diverted once again. Most of the trade negotiation, when we talk about regulatory cooperation, actually are thinking about standard on goods, and we have difficulties to make sure that actually the regulators regulating the lawyers, the accountant, the bankers should talk to each other and see whether it is possible to improve the relationship through the regulatory and without going back to the negotiating table. Let's come, what is the time, David? Let's come to the movement of people. It's about temporary entry. It's about the possibility for a Canadian service provider to go to Europe for a temporary period of time to do the services he's meant to do there and come back. So it's always about temporary. It's not about employment. It's not about migration. We have gone through, the EU has made offers, gone through all of these categories, essentially 3 categories. Intra-corporate transferee. This is about people working in a company is sent to the subsidiary or to the joint venture of that same company. So someone from Bombardier going from Bombardier here to where we heard in Belfast. So that a person is going to work for that company for 2 years. That is intra-corporate transferee. All of the possibility to do that are actually listed into the agreement. Basically, no barriers. All intra-corporate transferees should be able to come in. Then you have business visitors, and then you have contract service suppliers. Maybe let's focus on contract service suppliers 1 minute. because this is what is new really into the Ceta. It's about the possibility for sending someone from Canada to the EU, not to a subsidiary, but to the client. And to go, and if you are an IT engineer, if you are a lawyer, if you are an accountant, you can go from here to your client, provide what you have to do for 1 or 2 weeks, and come back. That was very difficult, if not impossible, a long time ago. Now, through Ceta, it's going to be possible. Not for all sectors, but we have the list here. The EU has listed 37 sectors where it's going to be possible for providers from Canada to move to the EU, in all EU countries, or all of these sectors. Of course, you do have some conditions. So you need to get your visa, you should not be on a penal list, etc. And then you would need to work for the company maybe for 1 year, or you will also need to show your diplomas and qualification, so that, the company will need to show the contract that the company has got from the client, so that you will have to show to the migration authorities, you're going there for a specific time, on a specific period of time, here's a contract. And also, you will need to show that you are working for the company for at least 1 or 2 years. The last category is an independent professional. That is a person who's got a contract with a company in Europe, but he doesn't have an employer. He's working for himself. Here, the negotiator said, okay, we are willing to get these guys because maybe there is a very clever IT person who invented a new application, and we should give the possibility to this person to move into the EU. But we don't want that these guys are actually going out of the university and then establish themselves forever, because this will not be temporary. And therefore, they put further conditions, i.e., for instance, you have to show that you're working on that specific sector for 6 years. So, the idea being, if you work for 6 years, you are well established into your country and your family, etc., so it's more difficult for you to move. The last slide is mutual recognition of professional qualification. This is about the possibility for lawyers, accountants, all of those who, to do their job, need a license, need to show their qualification, their diploma. It is very difficult. So you need to get access to the country. You need to have access, so we need to make sure that at the beginning we had the access. Then you need to have the mode 4, the possibility to get your visa. But if you go to France and you say, I'm a lawyer, I'm going to do French law tomorrow here, they're going to say, no, you have to tell us, you have to show us that you are actually qualified. That is the obligation in France and all EU countries, you are a lawyer. And then it's going to be said, well, I'm a lawyer for Canadian law only. Well, this program is showing the possibility, if the two mutual professions, the lawyers, for instance, or the architect, are willing to do so, to work together to find a way to recognize the qualification of each other, to say, okay, you are an architect for Germany, you are an architect for Canada, I have studied all of this, you have studied only this, you are missing that specificity, for instance, for earthquake. You are allowed to come to Germany, but you will need to do 6 months additional qualification of specific things if you want to get this qualification in Canada. So it's quite complicated, but we finally found a possibility. It was a long way to go, but we did it. I stop here. Thank you very much.
I know we're running tight, so I'll maybe have time for 1 or 2 questions, but let me just say a couple of things that Pascal slid by quickly. One, if you ever wondered how you can have a 1,600-page agreement, I think Pascal demonstrated the complexity of it in just this one little area. There was an earlier question about procurement. One of the slides he sailed by noted that the EU procurement market is worth $3.3 trillion. And so there are opportunities out there to be pursued. The emphasis on temporary entry. If you want to see a big difference with the NAFTA, which is being currently negotiated, led by the guy who negotiated the Ceta agreement on our side at least, you'll see that the Ceta is now miles ahead of where the NAFTA is, reflecting that NAFTA is an old agreement. And so the Cadillac or the Platinum Standard, whatever you want to call it, for temporary entry and this sort of movement of people reflecting globalization is very much now the Ceta agreement. And with that, maybe see if there's one question I can take.
Really, really quick.
Copies of the presentation.
Yes, yes, I'm going to mention that.
Yeah, Pascal had expressed earlier that he is willing to make the presentation because obviously it was fairly dense. Anyways, let me ask everyone to once again thank Pascal for a highly informative presentation.
I would like to introduce Elise Rasico, who is currently the manager of Can Export. This is a funding program of which you will hear more in the panel. Elise joined Canada's Foreign Service in 2002. She has served abroad as Consul and Trade Program Manager in Sao Paulo. She also, for a while, was the Quebec government's head of mission in Brazil on deployment from our department. Elise holds the distinction, ladies, of being the first female Canadian Trade Commissioner and Vice Consul in the Islamic Republic of Iran, a post she held earlier in her career. Yay! She has also in our department worked on the Russian desk and as the program officer for clean development in Central America and the Caribbean, a very diverse career, typical of trade commissioners. Over to you, Elise.
Thank you, Kathy, and this is great because the microphone is already at my size, which usually doesn't happen, so thank you for that. I think we're really lucky today, so I'm going to try to speak as little as possible because the people that you have in front of you are a wealth of knowledge of how you can best access support and help from the different levels of government in this experience of exporting, which is often an endeavor. I think we have a slide that we can go through. Oh, okay. Well, to the next one. Yeah, this one. So this one will stay the whole time because what we want to do today is try to show what's the exporter journey, if you'd like, and the different stages of it, and how the different partners have different tools and support they can offer to your company in order to achieve those stages and get to export success. So basically, we'll go from the export planning part, so basically market research, connecting with partners like the ones you have in front here, and navigating through government program in general. Sometimes it can sound a little bit like an alphabet soup, you know, with all the acronyms and whatnot. I think what I personally would like you to take away from today is that we all work really closely together and we're all there to connect you to the right person. So there's no wrong door. So that's one thing. And then we're going to go to going to the market. So once you've had this first contact and the market research is done, what are the next steps in terms of the planning, general business advice, and finding foreign market contacts? Then into the financing, because we all need money in order to realize those complex endeavors. And finally, when you're ready to enter the market and often have a presence locally, what does it mean and how can we help you? So I will quickly ask my colleagues to introduce each other, and then we'll ask a few questions that will allow them to talk a little bit more about the different type of supports their organizations offer. So maybe we can start with you.
I am Jonathan McCauley. I'm the Senior Government Relations Officer for the Canadian Commercial Corporation, known as CCC. My role is to build partnerships and to build awareness to Canadian exporters about our service to Canadian companies in terms of foreign procurement markets.
Hi, I'm Doug Phelan, ACOA Nova Scotia, Manager of International Business Development. Most people know a fair bit about ACOA, but if I had to say it in 10 words or less, basically to create opportunities for economic growth in Atlantic Canada. Small team that we have here in the office, a couple of account managers, John McKay, Craig Williams, and Anne-Louise Daphne are back in the office.
Raise a hand or something?
No, they're back in the office.
Okay.
I counted them before I left. One's in Toronto, actually. And then one of our colleagues who did such a good job that our Moncton office just rated her is actually in the office, in the building, Darlene Sponicle. It's a fantastic colleague, and worth mentioning as well that one of our partners we work closely with, Canada Business, Paul Duran, is just down the hall, and I mention him because he's going to end up a point of contact later on. That's me.
I'm Carolyn Wood. I'm Senior Account Manager with Export Development Canada, or EDC. EDC is Canada's export credit agency, and we're here to help companies go, grow, and succeed internationally. Joining me here today is our Regional Vice President, Ed Steeves, who's here, and all we do is help companies export and finance those exports and mitigate risk.
Perfect. Kyle Smicer, I'm the Director of Export Development at Nova Scotia Business Inc. And we've got a large group of individuals here, as Laurel, our CEO, mentioned earlier. So feel free to talk to any of them about any of our services and programs at any point. But really what NSBI focuses on is two things. Investment attraction, so working to help companies set up locations in Nova Scotia. And then the side that I focus on, the export development side, helping companies like yourselves export more. And from our perspective, export is really anything outside of the province of Nova Scotia, a little different than the international perspective. But and we'll talk a little bit more about that as we move forward.
Thanks.
Hi, good morning. My name is Christine Smith, and I'm the Regional Deputy Director for the Trade Commissioner Service Office here in Halifax. We serve the Atlantic region, and we work with our colleagues all over the world, who some have spoke here already this morning. We do have trade commissioners here today, and I'd like to point out that Stéphane Crapeau is here, Gaëtan Martineau is in the room as well today, and Alex Langtang. All trade commissioners, we serve all the Atlantic region. All of us here today are based in Halifax, but we do have trade commissioners in the other Atlantic provinces as well. And we're here to provide trade commissioner service on the ground support in Canada and to connect you to our networks abroad. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Michael Oldfield. I'm the Manager of Consulting Services with Business Development Bank, BDC. And very quickly, what BDC does is we help companies to grow and become more profitable. And we do that in two ways. We do that with money and advice. So we provide term loan facilities, and we provide consulting services.
So thanks, everyone. So as I told you, there's a lot of letters here, and sometimes it can all look really complex. But what we want to make sure today is that you understand the different types of services that you can leverage in order to make these EU opportunities real for your company. And by the way, I'd like to mention that pretty much all of us and a lot of our colleagues will all be available this afternoon at the Export Cafe for one-on-one discussions. So if you do have any, we'll have time for questions this morning, but if you do have like further discussions that you'd like to have with any of the different organizations that are here, please do come this afternoon. This time is for you, and we would love to have as many as possible of you with us this afternoon. So I'm going to ask some questions and direct them to different people, and we're going to, as I mentioned, go through the different stages of the export journey or the export path. All of those steps are really crucial in making it all the way to a successful endeavor, and we know how complicated this can be. So planning, like in any sort of development plan, is really important. So I would like to know what would be the advice that your organization and yourself, based on your experience, would give to a company that's planning to export for the first time or planning to expand to a new market entirely. And how could your organization assist them in this preparation work on how to avoid pitfalls? So maybe I'll start with Doug on how ACOA can do this, and what would be your advice in this sense?
It's like being in school when you don't know when you're going to get asked, right?
Yeah.
And then I'll say everything good, and there'll be nothing left for anyone else. It's one of those questions you could give a really long answer to. I actually have about a 90-minute presentation when I go and do this, and I won't do that because you'll never get to eat today. But I say to people, don't lose sight of what got you to where you are. You're in business, you're successful for a reason. Don't overcomplicate it. You do have to do your research, obviously, going into a market. there's so many resources that are right in front of you. If you're in the seafood business, don't come ask me what it's like to sell a lobster. Go ask Osborne. He'll tell you, or anyone else in the seafood business. It's free advice. I was, you know, more than a few years ago now, I remember I ended up working in Ottawa for a couple of years. I must have did something bad to deserve that, but no offense to Ottawa colleagues. But it used to surprise me how many firms from Ontario used to want to have a cup of coffee with me to ask me about doing business in Atlantic Canada. And they'd look at, show, this is what I'm going to go and present, this is what I'm going to do, what do you think? And when you'd look at it and say, well, you know, probably you shouldn't call them blue nosers or newfies, and you'd get past that, but it'd be amazing what people were going to put in a presentation. So I always say don't lose track. And there's obvious the basics when you're going into any market, whether it's next door, down the street, or across the world. I always say to people, look, it's like taking a walk in the park. Don't step in crap. And crap really is, you know, be wary when you walk around culture, religion, attitudes, and politics. And consultants in the room, if you mention me in that footnote, correctly spell my name. But just joking. Anyway, in terms of programs, we do have I guess I'll talk to them when we go through this, a lot to help people when they're early on, whether it's, you know, we do a lot of doing business in sessions. We have new exporter programs. And, you know, the other thing I'd say to folks, you obviously came out here today. That's the first step.
Thanks, Doug.
Yep.
Caroline, what about EDC? Any specific support and services that you can refer to in terms of that first stage of the export planning?
Absolutely. As Doug mentioned, research is very, very important. At EDC, we've done a lot of the research for you, so we have a lot of information on our website that's sort of set up as self-serve, so you can look for information. Our economics team has developed market profiles of countries, taking into account our experience, taking into account political situations, currency, all of those sorts of risks and situations. So you can go online and you can look and see what our experience has been, how much support has been provided in that market, and can kind of give you some information. We also have a number of white papers. If you're just starting exporting, we have a great one called The 6 Steps to Exporting that you can find online. We also provide information via webinars, participating in sessions like today. Sanjeev mentioned earlier today the Tariff Finder that we've partnered with BDC and Global Affairs Canada to develop. So that's online as well. That's all part of the information that we provide. So there's lots and lots of research and information available. So it's important to take the time to research. It can be a little intimidating, I know, but there is a lot of information to sort of guide your research.
And I have to say that we're really, I wouldn't say jealous, but we find that the wealth of information, like from the Trade Commissioner perspective and from my own perspective for sure, the wealth of information available on EDC website is incredible. So really putting more emphasis on Caroline just said, there's really a lot of things out in their website that's really worth it for exporters that are looking at that first step. So yeah, I would echo the same thing. What about the provincial views on this first step?
Absolutely. Well, so, I mean, new exporters would be a key goal of Nova Scotia Business Inc., trying to help companies take that first step into exporting. And we have a lot of tools and a lot of services that we can provide those companies. But I would say, first of all, we have a team of export development executives, a number in the room here today, that would just be happy to sit down with you and talk with you about what exporting could mean to your company, and help you identify challenges and opportunities that your company could look at. We have a self-assessment tool on our website. It's a 10-minute tool that could be your first step. And then we have actually a longer guided assessment tool that our export development executives can walk you through and really understand what challenges that you guys might need to address to help you take that next step into exporting. Doug and Carolyn talked a little bit about research. We certainly have a great research team at NSBI as well. We do trade market intelligence, about 80 reports a year for companies on markets as sort of an initial research into a market so that you don't end up on the ground and realize when you get there, maybe this isn't the right market for me. But I guess taking one step back, I think the key is we think you should dive in and export. We absolutely do. We think you should do it. That being said, we think you should make sure that you plan ahead, develop an export plan, and try to make sure that you're
cognizant of what might happen when you actually try to export. So we do have a program called the Small Business Development Program that helps companies hire consultants to develop an export plan. It provides $15,000 of funding on 50-cent dollars. It's a popular program, and it's something that you might want to look at if you haven't developed an export plan. It's something that could help you do that. Other than that, we do have a lot of topic-specific and Think Export workshops that we run throughout the province. So if there's a certain topic, or if it's just thinking about exporting in general, I would recommend attending one of those sessions as well. And like I said, as always, the one-on-one work that we do with companies, we're always happy to talk to a company one-on-one in our office or in their office, wherever it may fit best. So, yeah.
And if I may just build on one thing that Kyle said about like not hesitating to become an exporter when it's your first step. I think one of the thing that we heard before from our senior trade commissioners team and from some of the presenters and how some of the Ceta opportunities have been unlocked by this new agreement. Often companies tend to think as the US as a first market, but with this new agreement, Europe and the different markets there could be just as easy and maybe even easier in certain cases in certain sectors. So even if you haven't exported before, using all those services, you could unlock these opportunities even if Europe is your first target market. And we see increasingly, anyway from my own perspective, putting my Can Export hat, we see a lot more small companies that are looking to export for the first time, not in the US. So this might be an opportunity to look into that and take that step into another market that might be really profitable for your company. So just, Christine.
Well, I think a lot of what I wanted to say has probably already been said, and Kyle and I already talked about this morning. The Trade Commissioner Service is very well positioned as well to help companies that are looking at exporting for the first time. One of our key services that we do offer is called Preparation for International Markets. That's what we advertise, that's what we do. We have trade commissioners working across the country and around the world in over 160 cities, so we have good coverage. And trade commissioners working in the region are more than happy to sit down with companies and, similar to Kyle's team, talk about what it is you're looking to do. And we would use our network abroad to help find those answers to questions you may have. There's tons of tools online, and you saw some of them this morning. There's the guide for exporting. There's Kyle's tools. There's EDC's tools. Do your homework. I mean, that's the main thing. Get your homework done before you plan to go abroad. For those questions that you can't find answers to, we're more than happy to help find ways to tap into our network abroad to get those specific types of answers and guidance that you need. So, you know, if you're looking at exporting and you're doing some research and you don't know where to go, just give us a call. Give any of the people on this panel a call. We do a lot of referrals back and forth between our organizations, and we do work very collaboratively. So that would be my guidance and advice.
And that's a great key thing to remember. Again, no wrong doors. All those people work together, so don't hesitate. If you need something, you'll find the right path by knocking on any of these doors. So from a BDC perspective, what would be this first step, the advice that you could provide in the services?
So if you're a company located in Nova Scotia and you're interested in exporting, the world's a pretty big place. So it's a little bit like deciding to compete in next month's Olympics. Let's say downhill skiing and you've never skied before. You may want to start on the bunny slope, right? Before you hit the double diamonds. And that's to see if you have the skills and the competency. So I think that probably the first step that we would advise someone is to do a growth potential. And really what we would suggest with that first step would be, does your organization have the potential right now to become a successful exporter? And so by definition, we would look at the operational capacity and the organizational capacity and the financial capacity, because we would expect you to be set up for success. So within the operation, do you have the capacity to expand production and so forth? Do you have access to supply chain that will set you up for success? Do you have the right organization? For example, if you're going to set up in France, do you have anyone in your company that speaks French? Do you have the financial capacity? If all of a sudden your business takes off and you double, that could put a potential strain on your working capital and other financial resources. So that would be step one. And step two might be looking at your highest potential market. Again, I mean, just looking at the EU, you're looking at in around 25 different countries, different markets. Which one represents the highest potential? And we would suggest that would be supported by research. And then probably the third step would be to develop a market entry plan. And that's one where we would suggest looking at your competitive analysis and your risk management, so risk assessment, and just to develop a strategic plan that looks not at a transactional basis, but more of a sustainable growth perspective. And actually, that's a really important point. We see a lot of companies that they get all excited because they get an order internationally, so now all of a sudden they're an exporter, right? But unless that's fit in a coherent strategic manner, the next order might be on the other side of the world and so forth, and before you know it, after 3 or 4 years go by, you don't have necessarily a market. So it becomes, depending on what you sell, it can become difficult to support and it could strain your resources. So we would say in the development of that market plan so that it's a sustainable growth, and the next level down would be an actionable, operational plan. So, yeah.
But that's a good point. And actually, there's a stat that came from the BDC that really stuck with me, that most small business that become an exporter into new markets after 2 years are not present in that market anymore, and often because of that step that's been missed. So hence the importance of that planning and research phase, and making sure that you have the capacity and that you are well accompanied in order to do this. So once this research is done, the market potential or the assessment of the company to become an exporter has been done, and some preparation. Company is ready to go to market and do the promotion and meet potential clients. So what can your organization do about this? And I'll start with the TCS because I'm a trade commissioner. So I think that we can do a lot in that sense. Not that the other ones can't, but hey, I go with the family on this one. Okay. And Christine, could you tell me a little bit more about how we can help in that sense?
Well, once the company has determined that they're ready to go to market, I think it's key to tap into some of our services. And there are two key services that I want to highlight. One would be market potential assessment. So we offer this to companies, and it's done mostly through our trade commissioners working overseas, to help companies really identify whether their product or service is a fit for that market and what the competition is like. So you get that on the ground, in-market assessment by a trade commissioner as to the probability of success in that market for you. The other important one would be the identification of qualified contacts. And this is something we do a lot as a department. And it's a really important aspect because small companies may not have the resources available to them to have good connections into a foreign market, to understand who they need to talk to, who the potential suppliers are, who the regulators are. Our trade commissioners on the ground overseas are there to network, to find those people for you. And they often come to us from the local industry with very good Rolodexes and very good understanding of who's who in their industry, how to do business in that market. So that's when I always suggest to companies, if you're going to go to the market, get that on-the-ground expertise that the Canadian government has put there for you to help you become more successful. So those are just the two that I would say. In terms of accessing that, in the regional network, we'd be more than happy to work with you to identify who the colleague is at post, best placed, who works in your sector, who has that level of intelligence and information that could really help you in the market.
Thanks, Christine. And Kyle, what about the provincial take on this? So how can you help companies who are looking at that phase of marketing and getting to the market?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, step one is obviously we work closely with all the partners that are here and others. So we would certainly recommend, for example, speaking with Global Affairs before entering a market. But we do ourselves do a number of trade missions every year. We work with partners such as ACOA on these missions. We started this year doing a lot more new exporter missions. So for companies just trying to get started with exporting, we did one into Boston earlier in the spring. There's another one into Boston with the Atlantic partners That'll happen in February. Just taking new exporters on an education mission and trying to get them to understand what it's like to actually go into market, meeting with a bunch of specialists and partners in market. We also did a new to the EU mission just a couple months ago, taking companies that have exported but not into Europe. So taking them to a new market, and it's something that as we move into next year, we'll start doing a lot more of that. We do missions as well with export-ready companies, really focused on specific sectors. So very sector-specific missions on ICT, ocean tech, agri-food, seafood, beverages would be the sectors that we're focused on, because that's the province of Nova Scotia's priority sectors at this point. We do a lot of missions into Europe. So today we're here to talk about the EU. We've had a big focus on the EU over the last couple of years, and that will continue as we move into the next year or so as well. The other thing I would say from a actually going to market perspective is that for companies that maybe a trade mission isn't the right fit, if they want to go to market on their own, we do have a program called the Export Growth Program that's very popular. It's, again, a $15,000, 50-cent program that helps companies pay for travel to market and accommodations when they're in market, to attend trade shows or to visit potential clients. It's essentially to do their own trade mission into a market. And that program has been very popular and will continue on as we move forward into next year. So, yeah.
Thanks, Kyle. So from, again, an ACOA perspective, because Kyle mentioned working a lot with you on missions and whatnot, Doug, would you have specific programs or services that you could highlight from an ACOA perspective?
Yeah, Kyle is picking my pocket all the time. No, I'm joking. We work very close together, and I can't stress it enough. Everyone on this panel works very close together. There's no way you're going to be able to remember every program that everyone is going through here this morning, and I don't think that's the intention. When I got up and did the quick introduction, I mentioned Mr. Paul Giran down there. He's still here. He didn't leave. I haven't been that boring. So, Paul's with Canada Business. If you're going into a market, you're pretty much sure you're ready to go, and you just want to make sure you've checked out every program that's available. Someone like Canada Business is not a bad spot to give a quick phone call to and say, you know what, hey, I think I'm ready to go into the Turkish market, but I'm just not sure who's got what that I should be talking to, and that is your final step, kind of before you hop on the plane, is not a bad thing to do. Before I mention a couple of programs, to say simply, look at your company's bottom line and see what you're prepared to commit to the market, and obviously not spread yourself too thin. We have a whole number of programs. Kyle mentioned the things we've worked together on with the new exporter missions. If you want to take a lot of the guesswork out of this, it's the incredibly risk-free, easy way to get into market, get your feet wet, and ensure this is what you want to do. A lot of folks say to me, what's the value of going on a trade mission? Because we collectively all work in a number of trade missions. If you're going to a trade show and you want to look at what the cost of booking one of those booth spaces is yourself, then come back and talk to me about what the advantage is going in. To go in on your own, it's near astronomical, and to also get to go in right now and capitalize on the Canada brand. And you go in collectively as a group, and you also learn a lot from the other people who are on the mission with you. I think that's a real advantage to it. In terms of programs, obviously we're involved in missions. We have programs to help people prepare to get into market, to follow up. I'm probably going to eliminate myself from answering the next question that you're going to ask on the next part, but essentially come in and sit down with someone and talk one-on-one and get some ideas, and then see kind of where you fit in the programs.
And on this point of the presence at a pavilion or something where you capitalize on the Canada brand, I think it's also worth mentioning that often you get a much better spot than you would at a trade show, and then it makes it so much easier to attract the interest of potential clients. So just to compliment. And from an EDC perspective, Carolyn, what would your organization be able to offer at this point to companies?
Yeah. EDC has an extensive network throughout Canada, but we also have 20 representatives abroad. They're located in various locations throughout the world. Typically, we're co-located with the embassies or consulates abroad, and we have a couple of standalone offices that we've just opened. Our officers abroad are really, their mandate is to promote Canadian capabilities. And one of the ways that we do that is really working with large international buyers in those markets. And we provide financing to those international clients with an eye to opening up their supply chain for Canadian companies. All of these financing facilities are online on our website, and you can leverage potentially, if you're interested in selling to one of these companies, you can perhaps leverage that relationship to access their supply chain. So that's one of the ways that we help. I think in the going to market, there's a lot of great resources. We do all work together. As I mentioned, we're co-located at the consulates and the embassies abroad. So we work very closely abroad with Global Affairs Canada. We also work very closely with them here in Canada as well.
And if I can say from experience, I've been worked in Brazil where we have in 2 of our offices co-located EDC personnel. The wealth of access they have to those big companies with whom they work, and they have financing facilities, is incredible. So by all means, make sure that if your company can supply services or products to one of those companies, that you look into this and get in touch with them. And from a BDC perspective, what can be achieved by a company by working with BDC on that part of the export journey?
Well, when Kyle was talking about going alone, reminded me of a company that we've worked with, and before they came to us, they received an order. It was actually coming from a client that they had acquired in the U.S., and the first order that came through represented more business than they had done as an entire company for the entire year. So with that one order, they doubled. And the problem, which is a great problem, but they didn't have the capacity to fill it. So we would probably suggest looking at the organizational capacity, and part of the, I guess, the types of things that we would help the company look at would maybe be technology, like they're going to be dealing in different currencies, perhaps multiple currencies, and tracking inventories overseas and across boundaries and so forth. So that might be an area that we would encourage them to look at, is whether they need to adopt some new technology, a robust system to handle things. You don't want containers of fresh seafood going missing, for example. That might be one thing. Another thing might simply be to examine their productivity. And so if they're a processor, how can they optimize that? How can they be as productive as possible? Also certifications, things like ISO certification or CFIA or HACCP, any of those type of things are services that our advisory team helps companies with, and a lot of times they come into play once they become an exporter. Not so much that it may not be that the regulations require it, but it might be just the norm of that market. A couple other things may be simply on the HR side of things. Do they have the right organizational structure that works today and for tomorrow? Really, it all goes back to the same point about a sustainable growth model. So we would advise companies not to be looking transactionally at this, not a one here and a one there, but to build the capacity and to build it within a plan, and so that their organization can grow sustainably in a way that doesn't jeopardize the mothership, right? You want to be able to keep your home base of operations nice and strong and robust, so that you have a strong platform to grow. Yeah.
And while we're talking about these things, it often requires financing and money and different type of solutions that the BDC also can offer. So now that you have the microphone, can you also tell us a little bit more about what the BDC can do in that side of things and the financing part?
Sure. And in fact, we're probably best known for our ability to finance. And when it comes to international expansion, things that really are at the top of the list would be could be your production. So we would look at financing expansion. Maybe you need additional plant or land or building. It could be simply to beef up your inventory. So, from that perspective, BDC has something which we call the market expansion loan, and it's for those companies that are looking to grow and expand. And there would also be potential for acquisition of a company in a foreign country. So we would look at financing of that if that presented itself. And just things like financing technology, if it's a $200,000 ERP system, or financing just some working capital to attend trade shows, or to hire additional staff, or to beef up your marketing efforts. So all of these cost money, and the reality is, in a sustainable situation, you may not see a return for 1 to 2 to 3 years from the investment that you've been making. So it's really important to have the financial model in place, which it's very helpful to have some flexible financing in place to do that.
Allows you to keep your head out of water and breathe while you're pursuing this longer term goal.
Well, without jeopardizing your domestic operations. Yeah.
Thanks. And what about EDC? There's also some ways that you can offer some financing solutions for companies who are entering a market.
That's right. EDC is Canada's Export Credit Agency. So we were created solely for that purpose, to fill that niche requirement for Canadian companies and to help them with risk mitigation and working capital solutions. So all of our products and services are really geared towards either mitigating risk or helping Canadian companies access working capital. So to give you an example of that, one of the products that we're most well known for are our insurance products. So if you're going to a foreign country and making your first sale, you have a decision to make. You can either ask for that your buyer to pay you up front, which doesn't always work so well, and you might be missing sales opportunities if you're insisting on cash up front, or you can provide your buyer with terms. And if you provide your buyer with terms and they don't pay you, that can be really risky for your business and for your bottom line. So we can step in and provide insurance solutions, and we can be really creative around the solutions that we can provide to you. We can provide selective insurance coverage on just 1 or 2 buyers, or we can go in and look at a whole portfolio credit insurance solution. So with EDC's insurance solutions, you can sell to your buyer with the comfort of knowing that if your buyer doesn't pay, we will pay you. So our insurance provides 95% of that receivable. So that gives you that confidence to grow, that you're not going to be risking your bottom line. It also gives you the opportunity to perhaps export more and sell more by offering terms to your buyers. The other issue that clients have quite often going into new markets is, how do you finance those export contracts, and how do you build up inventory? How do you complete your product? How do you invest abroad? All those sorts of things can be difficulties for working capital for Canadian companies. So we have a partnership preferred approach where we partner with Canadian banks to help the Canadian banks be more comfortable to provide you with credit. So that program is called our Exporter Guarantee Program, and we provide a guarantee to the bank to allow you to access that working capital. Those solutions, as I mentioned, can be very wide-based depending on what your need is, but it can help you execute your contracts. It can help you build up your inventory. It can be specific to one specific contract, or it could be over multiple export contracts. It can also help you invest abroad or hold inventory abroad. So that's another way that we help you access working capital. A third program that we have is around our insurance and bonding. Quite often in international markets, you may be required to put up a performance bond or a bid bond, depending on the industry. And in those cases, your bank is going to require you to provide cash security for those bonds, or credit, and they'll tie up your operating line of credit. And that can be really difficult for your company and really restrict your cash. EDC can come in and provide what we call an account performance security guarantee, whereby we provide our guarantee to your bank, which frees up your capital or your credit for other purposes. So EDC has so many different financial solutions and risk mitigation solutions. But in the interest of time, I'll leave it at that. But I will leave you, if you are going to export or currently exporting and you have a concern about a risk or you have a concern about working capital, we probably have a solution and we'd love to talk to you, and we'll be around this afternoon in the Export Cafe.
Thanks, Carolyn. Of course, because I'm representing an export as well by being here, I'd like to just say that maybe in the interest of time, that I'll be here this afternoon. So if anyone wants to know a little bit more about how we can also, with the Trade Commissioner Service, provide certain financing solutions for different things that go from market research to certification to going to market and many other things. I'd be really happy to talk this afternoon with you guys, and I think our Trade Commissioner Service team here knows really well about the program as well, and so you can also reach out to them. The final step, so once you're in the market and entering it, some of you have touched on these things already, but I'll ask the CCC to talk a little bit, because you've been patiently waiting for this part where the Canadian Commercial Corporation can really play a role. So maybe if you want to say a few words, Jonathan.
Thank you. Keeping the best for last. So actually, it's great that all the partners are here in the front, because we do work closely with all of the partners, and CCC is very complementary to them. But we're very particular, and we're in a very niche part of international trade, which is government procurement markets. So Sanjeev mentioned earlier that Europe offers a $3.3 trillion procurement market. And of course, that a lot of that you can find through the ted.europa.eu website for the tenders that are open. Where CCC comes in is sometimes while you're doing your business development in Europe, there might be some more specialized contracts that you're seeking. Perhaps they're in the defense sector and the government is looking for, has a national security reason and is looking for something very specific. Or maybe that government has an urgent nature and they're looking for a capability, a service, or a product that your company offers. In those instances, that's where CCC will come in. Oftentimes, you'll know about us and you'll knock on our door because you're already having conversations about entering these complex government procurement markets. Or you'll have spoken to the TCS, and the TCS, we report to the same minister, the Minister of Trade, and the TCS will say to us that they've got a Canadian company that has a very interesting product that has an opportunity to sell it to a foreign government. They're an experienced exporter, and they want to talk to you. So what we do is we talk to that company. We get to know each other. CCC, because as part of our contracting expertise, we offer that foreign buyer a guarantee of performance of the contract. But for us to do that, we need to make sure that your company is able to perform that contract. So we do quite an extensive due diligence process. So we make sure that you have the technical, the managerial, and the financial ability to deliver on that contract. We also make sure that that contract is in a financial area that is similar to your own company's financial abilities, just to make sure that everything will go as planned. What we do is we then work with you in terms of drafting a proposal. When that proposal is ready, CCC will submit it as an unsolicited proposal to the foreign government buyer. That foreign government will then say whether they're interested to work with us through government to government, which is sort of it's a commercial bilateral agreement that we do from government to government. So that's the tool and the mechanism that we offer you. And then what we do, if the government agrees, is we sign an agreement with you, the exporter, and we work together to negotiate that contract. CCC sits at the table with you on your side, looking after your interests, while talking with that foreign government buyer. And what we bring is the Government of Canada's partnership. So we work closely with the TCS and with EDC, especially if there's financial or insurance reasons. And we'll make sure that you have the government's support behind you the Canada brand package at the table. Now, once that contract is negotiated and it's a win, and we're all excited, CCC then will sign a subcontract with you, and then you'll deliver on all of the terms and conditions of the contract, and we'll help to oversee the payments that will go through us. So we'll guarantee those payments, and we'll also do any troubleshooting during the contract delivery.
So just a question, Jonathan. There's often a misconception, I think, about the CCC that it's only for defense. But I think you can maybe elaborate a little bit and say how you're also active in other sectors.
Thank you, Elise. Yes, that's a great point. So CCC was originally created mostly for contracts that are in the defense sector. And we're known for that and for our contracts in aerospace. But we have diversified, and we are active in other sectors, particularly the ones that were actually mentioned earlier today. Construction and infrastructure, clean technology, renewable energy and the environment, ICT, and amongst others. We won't ever say no where the government-to-government mechanism makes sense, that it's a tool that can actually help you as an exporter. For example, we have contracts in Bangladesh where we have Canpotex that is exporting potash, which doesn't fall under any of our sectors, but it is a specialized product that Bangladesh would only buy through the government-to-government mechanism, as an example. Not in Europe, but an example.
Yeah. Thank you, Jonathan. And you mentioned troubleshooting, and I'm looking at Christine because this is one of our key services, so maybe you can say a few words about that.
Okay, well, very briefly, so we're moved on to the last one, are we, Elise? The last question? Yeah. Okay. So we as a department and the Trade Commissioner Service do advertise that we provide commercial problem solving. So that can be really important for companies that are exporting into foreign markets, because sometimes all your best plans can go wrong and you can have issues. Perhaps you have, for example, a shipment that's been stuck at a border and you need some help clearing it through customs or navigating that system. So that's something that the Trade Commissioner Service can help you with. We have trade commissioners, like I said, in many places around the world, working out of embassies and consulates and high commissions. And they often have very good networks into those foreign governments and can help you pathfind through the regulatory bodies that you need to work through. They can also make recommendations on professionals that can help you. Maybe you need a good lawyer in a market. So they would have a list of qualified, vetted lawyers, accountants, third-party service providers that can really help you problem solve and navigate those systems. A key thing to remember is that the Canadian government can never enter into the commercial dispute on your behalf. We can't do that as a government. But we're really there to facilitate and to help and provide that on-the-ground insight and connection to help resolve problems. And that's what we mean when we say commercial problem solving.
Thank you, Christine. And in the matter of time, and I know we're also all standing between you and your lunch, and that's always a difficult position, especially after so much food for thought. So quickly before we go into the room and see if there's any question for our speakers, I'd just like maybe if there's any last word of wisdom from any of you really experienced presenters today. I'd like to pass on to anyone who have a little key advice for everyone in the room today to use this. Doug.
Yeah, I'll be quick. And I'm not revealing a name of a company because this happened to a company from another country that I knew of that was doing business in Europe. And they had a number of contracts, were doing really, really well, but they hadn't spent that much time in the market. And they told me the story about it. They said, we never went back to that market a whole lot. We didn't nurture it. We thought we were doing great. And the economic downturn came. And every person we dealt with dropped us. And he said, I followed up years later to see what happened. And the feedback I got from everyone was, you were the easiest person to drop because I didn't know you. And it's probably why people break up on email, I don't know. But, the whole thing about it, I guess, and the person said, I didn't realize Europe was a relationship market. And the last bit of, if there's any bit of wisdom, every market's a relationship market. The relationships are different, but they're all relationship markets.
Yeah, thanks. That's a good point. Relationships. Anyone else has a key takeaway for our crowd today? Or no? Yes, please, Sanjeev.
Yes. Okay. I just wanted to mention to the people in the audience that this panel is very special for us. It was not supposed to be exactly like this, but there's a reason why we have all of these federal partners and provincial partners up here. Our Chief Trade Commissioner for Canada, as I mentioned earlier, is a woman named Dr. Ailish Campbell. And when Ailish was reviewing this, she's the head of the Trade Commissioner Service. So when she was reviewing our plans for these roadshows, she said, I want to have the Canadian Commercial Corporation, I want EDC, BDC on stage together with all of the provincial partners and other federal partners that can assist exporters. So there's a reason why, Jonathan, the CCC, like EDC, BDC, they've got reps in all of the provinces, but the CCC is based out of Ottawa, and we've flown Jonathan down here, even though his particular service is very niche-oriented. But she thought it would be a great idea to have all of the federal partners that can assist you with exporting together. So this is a very unusual panel. You're not going to see this. You probably haven't seen it before. I know the CCC, I don't think you've been part of the panel before, but there's a reason why they're all here. The other thing that she wanted also in every city in which we've done, thanks to the work in this particular province of NSBI, is we have identified a business champion. In this case, it's Osborne, but in every province has chosen their own business champion because, as they mentioned throughout these presentations, and Greg Houlihan from London said this same thing, that if you want to do exporting to Europe, the greatest advice you can get is from somebody who's already done it. And Osborne mentioned the wonderful cooperation that exists within Nova Scotia, but we found that all across the Atlantic provinces. People are very willing to help you. They will tell you what they've done right, what they've done wrong. They will steer you in the right direction. I can't believe when Osborne said that when you're at the booth at a trade show and all the Nova Scotians are side by side, the competitors, if he's not there and somebody comes looking for him, the others will take a message. Well, they don't do that for me. They send them to my competitors. So this is, they're really happy when I take a break. But at any rate, that's why this panel is here. So this was a direction of the Chief Trade Commissioner to have this group like this. So please take advantage of that and keep in mind that even though this is a panel, all of these people are in the Export Cafe after. So Jonathan will be there from the CCC. They all have a booth in the room down the hall. So if you have any specific questions, you can see them there as well. Okay? Thanks.
But
I had to mention that because I know the Chief Trade Commissioner is live streaming, so I wanted to make sure the boss knows that.
But we have 10 minutes now for any questions that would be of a more general nature. So by all means, if there's anyone here in the room who has a burning question, we'd be happy to take the microphone around.
I have one over here.
Okay, thanks.
Hi there, thanks very much. Excellent presentation. I was pleased to see the earlier focus on service, trade and service providers. I'm wondering if the presenters here could comment on special services that they have to help those who export services.
So any specific agency or department want to take a first crack at this question on services and how we can help companies in that sector given the opportunities in Europe?
I can chat a little bit about that. We don't have a specific focus necessarily on goods or services at NSBI. We try to help any company that can potentially export or that is exporting. So we have a group, actually a number in the room here, of export development executives that are sector agnostic and really focus on helping companies build capacities to export. So that's back to that self-assessment tool and back to the guided assessment. At any point, they would be happy to sit down with a services company, go through their export plan or help them build an export plan, and then help walk them through the stages to be able to export more or into a new market or wherever it might be. We certainly are also always looking at different ways, innovative solutions on how we can help companies get into market. I can give you an example. It's not a European example, but it could potentially be a European example at some point. But we just over the last year developed something called the Scale Up Hub in Cambridge, and it's really focused on tech-enabled service-type companies, trying to scale them in the New England market. So we've hired a business development representative in that market. We've leased some office space at WeWork, and we have 4 companies now that are in the program working with us for 1 year and trying to really help them scale in that market. And that's something we're working with the other Atlantic provinces with, maybe looking at a European market as a next step. So we're always looking for different types of ways to work with companies, not necessarily always on the trade mission route that we've done in the past. But I would say the message from NSBI's perspective is that we're open. We have a regional team across the province. There's 8 of them. They would be the first point of contact and knock on the door, get in and start talking with us. And we've got a lot of different services and solutions for companies, whether it's goods or services. So, yeah.
And I think that's probably true for everyone on this stage, that as much as we do support companies that offer goods and export goods, we do the same for services. I know programs are also covering both. So if you want to discuss in any more details this afternoon, please come and see us.
I'd just like to
yes,
follow
please,
up on that answer. So one of the challenges companies have if they're in the service sector is financing. We see that because there's some cases not hard assets that form as a security or an asset base. So with a traditional lender, sometimes that becomes a challenge for those companies. And so BDC has developed a number of solutions that are friendly towards knowledge-based industries. And so to your point about service, so particularly as of 2018, actually, so quite hot off the press, BDC has developed some very specific technology-related financing. Some of those would be applicable for companies that are even pre-revenue, and some of those would be for companies that are actually scaling up and have fairly significant capital requirements, to the point where this doesn't happen every day, so it's a little more on the exotic side, but BDC's venture arm will take, under the right circumstance, will take an equity position in a company to help them really get access to capital and scale up. So.
Taking advantage to mention that the BDC is doing a lot of work with VC for women-owned companies. I've been seeing from up close. I know also Josie is in the room somewhere, our businesswoman in international trade program manager, and together we were in Toronto with a lot of your BDC colleagues at a We Connect event a few months ago, and I was really impressed by the investment that's being done in women-owned companies. So all the VC and whatnot. So if any of you are business entrepreneurs, by all means, this is a good way to access capital with the BDC, who's been such a champion for women-owned companies. And I invite you to come see Josie this afternoon, if that's the case. Any other comments on the services side? No? So maybe we have time for one other question before we have lunch. So one right here. Just if you just want to take maybe the microphone so people who are not in the room can understand the question.
The last word is live streaming. Oh, yes. No, it's more of a comment. When I look up at the panel, excluding our friend on the left here, but we've used the service of all the other agencies here as an exporter and into the marketplace, whether it be different financing programs to assist or assistance in the market, or even Doug pulling me other way of a car on a busy night in Munich and saved me from being run over. I don't know what damage would have been to the vehicle.
Troubleshooting.
He's gone for the full length of it. Wife wasn't happy with him.
She hasn't forgiven me.
She says she hasn't forgiven him for that. But overall, and some of the comments that everybody's made, I can relate to, and or encourage anybody and everybody to do the same thing. And another resource, whether in the booth or a phone call away, is other exporters like ourselves.
Yeah.
For the Nova Scotian companies or for anybody, is helping them, whether it's prior to the show, at the show, assisting each other. It's amazing how much business has been done between Nova Scotia companies in the booth with each other, that in some cases we don't get to meet up with each other until we're at the trade show. And we have actually done hundreds of thousands of dollars of sales amongst companies, or finding out that a particular company offers a service that somebody else can use that they weren't aware of. So sometimes we miss that perspective of it, but that does happen, and happens significantly more all the time. And just the ability to get into it. When you go into Brussels, I mean, you walk in the hall, it's the big Canada sign, and you get the prime locations. You could never afford to do that on your own. So, you know, a few $1,000 to contribute towards the cost of booths versus $100,000 US if you want to do it on your own. So the services are there, and I encourage anybody to take advantage of them. Thank you.
And thanks. That means so much more coming from someone who's experienced it than us who is just trying to look good and, and say all the things that we do and we hope to do for your company. So thanks for sharing your experience. So we do have 3 minutes left. So if there's any burning questions, we can take one more. I know I said it was the last one, but we do have time for one more question, if there's anyone. No? Okay, so then I would like all of you to join me in thanking this wonderful panel. Great job.
Ladies and gentlemen, I commend you. You're back in the 20 minutes. Thank you so much for rejoining us. It now gives me great pleasure. Yeah, that's Sanjeev. He's the ringmaster here. It now gives me great pleasure to present to you Peter McCaskill, who will be introducing our keynote speaker. Peter, I think some of you know, is the Chief Operating Officer of NSBI. He joined that organization in 2002 as Director of Compliance and Risk Management. He became its Vice President in 2012 and its COO in 2015. Prior to NSBI, Peter spent 8 years with TD Waterhouse in Toronto, where he managed operations departments for the brokerage lines of TD Bank. Over to you, Peter.
Hi, welcome everyone. As Catherine said, I'm Peter McCaskill, COO at NSBI, and I'm very honored, very happy to be here today. And so far today, I think it's been great. There's been some wonderful takeaways. Hopefully you and your business and businesses have seen something which is valuable for you to take home. At Nova Scotia Business Inc., we're committed to working towards a strong, thriving, and globally competitive Nova Scotia by attracting global investment to create new jobs around the province and working with companies in all Nova Scotia communities to be more successful exporters. According to Export Development Canada, a little plug for one of our partners, research has shown that when a company embraces exports, it's likely to be 30% more productive and experience annual growth at a rate of 20% faster than other companies. In addition to that, companies make 121% more revenue than average. So why export? Companies that export are more profitable, as our little banner says over there. Simply put, companies who diversify their markets experience faster revenue growth, and companies that export are more successful. Today, I'd like you to just remember 3 things from what we're here for and what our partners are here for and what you heard in the panel. We're here to help you find opportunities. We're here to help you build relationships and connections, and we're here to help you succeed in Europe and other global markets. The partners that we have that you heard earlier today are dedicated to leveraging opportunities in export from Ceta. So I hope everyone who is interested in discussing their company's efforts have registered for the sessions that were mentioned earlier, again, and the registration's out there. I think, are there still some gaps? You think you're full? All right. Catch them while they're here. And again, I'd like to thank the Senior Trade Commission and everyone from Global Affairs who is here today. So right now, we're fortunate to have the Ambassador of the European Union to Canada, Ambassador Peter Eustubs. I've had the pleasure of meeting the Ambassador before, and I can share with you that the Ambassador is highly engaged and he's genuinely interested in our region. Ambassador Eustubs began his mandate in Canada in September. Previously serving as America's senior advisor in the cabinet of Federica Mogherini, High Representative of the European Union for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy Vice President of the European Commission. Ambassador Eustubs has held senior positions with the European External Action Service, including as Director for West and Central Africa. Prior to that, he was Deputy Head of Cabinet of Andris Piebalgs, the European Commissioner for Development. Ambassador Eustubs joined the Latvian Diplomatic Service in 1993 and served as representative of Latvia to the Political and Security Committee of the EU, the Foreign Policy Advisor to the Prime Minister and Under Secretary of State, Political Director of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. This is a momentous time for Canada and the EU, and it's truly an honor to have you here with us today. Thank you so much for joining us to share your time, your wisdom, insight, and experience. Everyone, please welcome Ambassador Oosthuizen.
Good afternoon. And I don't know either this is the good part or bad part to speak over the lunch. So from one side, I think it is good because you don't need any other entertainment because the food is there. Otherwise, still, I think there are a few messages I would like to pass through my notes and speech to you as the businesses and as Canadian businesses looking for Europe. First of all, thank you very much for a very warm welcome to Halifax and Nova Scotia. I would like to thank Global Affairs as well as Atlantic Canada Opportunities Agency for inviting me to come along and be part of this trip to Atlantic provinces, to Maritimes, and to have an opportunity to speak to you. And this was one of the ideas we discussed with Sanjeev and Eilish Campbell some time ago, saying that I think we need to join forces. It is not only for EU to talk to EU, it is not only to Canadians to talk to the Canadians. We have something in common, we have Ceta, and we need to talk to each other and work together, because I think both sides, European Union and Canada, would like to succeed with this agreement. This is only my third trip to Maritimes, but I must say there is something particularly familiar about this beautiful province, Nova Scotia and Halifax. Perhaps it is the evidence of strong European heritage, what I see everywhere around me, or perhaps the proximity and the importance of the sea to life, as it reminds me of my own roots growing up on the shores of the Baltic Sea. Atlantic Ocean is a uniting element for Canada and Atlantic provinces with the European Union, but not the only one. Our focus today is on trade, economic growth and cooperation. In fact, I disappoint you, nothing new, because the trade existed already between Canada and Europe for many, many centuries. What is new today is how we trade, how much we open markets to each other, what kind of rules we apply, and how much predictability we provide. This is the approach to trade, and this is the new approach, and that approach has a name, and it is Ceta, what we are talking about today. Ceta is often seen as something unique and unprecedented in history of trade relations anywhere around the globe. It is called Golden Standard, most progressive and comprehensive trade agreement ever achieved. Therefore, today we are talking about something very impressive. Negotiators know everything about it, they know every detail, and they are very proud what has been achieved during the negotiations. But Ceta is not for negotiators, nor Ceta is to be put in the museum for admiration by millions of tourists. It is a very sophisticated, advanced trading tool of 21st century to be used by businesses, companies, individuals, all sizes of enterprises, all across Canada and European Union. It is a tool to be used by you. This tool does not require any complex assembly, but still it requires some action from your side. First, knowledge about its existence. If you are here today, you already fulfilled first criteria. Second, curiosity how it works. How it will work for me, my enterprise, my business, And again, this seminar today is the right place to ask all possible and impossible questions how in practice Ceta works and operates. Third, readiness to test it. I do hope that seminar today will provide you with many convincing arguments and practical examples, and without delay, very many of you will look for business opportunities within the European Union. Using language of modern technologies, I would like to think that Ceta is like a trade app. You have to download it to test it, how it works, and you have to talk to other users to share experience. And last but not least, courage. Ceta is challenging you to step out of the routine and comfort. Look for something new, go somewhere for the first time, visit any of the EU 28 member states, and find partners for your business. Nobel Peace Laureate William Faulkner said, "You cannot swim for new horizons until you have courage to lose sight of the shore." And I'm convinced that your courage will be rewarded. But still, you might ask, how and why? Your courage will be rewarded as Ceta is here to be used as of today. It is prêt-à-porter. You don't need to wait. Use it. Your courage will be rewarded as Ceta provides clear market conditions and provides predictable rules. Therefore, forget about uncertainty for trade and your investments. Your courage will be rewarded as Ceta brings you to economically sound and growing market of 500 million consumers. It covers not only traditional trade in goods, services, but also procurement, probably something you need to look more closer. In 2017, the EU entered its 5th consecutive year of growth, on average 2%, and forecasts for 2018 are in the similar range. Business confidence in the EU, measured by Economic Sentiment Index, is at its highest point registered over a decade, and unemployment is at 9 years low, with 235 million people at work. More people are employed in the European Union than ever before. Ceta is rewarding for Canadian and European economies. We know that for every 1 billion euros we get in exports, 14,000 extra jobs are created in the European Union. Currently, 1 in 7 of all jobs in the EU depend on exports to the rest of the world. That's a total of 30 million jobs. If it is true for the EU, I'm convinced it is also true for Canada. And Ceta might help to diversify risks and markets, diminish dependence on one particular market or one customer and consumer. We are also invited to think about tremendous synergies and impressive landscape what open, transparent, and predictable rules-based trade brings to Canada and European Union. Looking into future, we are invited to connect dots between Ceta, CP, TPP, and beyond. Today, European Union has free trade agreements with more than 80% of the countries on this planet. And EU is the first trading partner for 80 countries on this planet as well. Canada has some catch-up to do on this, in this regard, and Ceta will help. In short, we believe that openness combined with the high standards remains the most fitting way to make globalization work, and we want this idea to spread. Some like sunset, some like sunset clauses. Ceta is different. Ceta is a beautiful sunrise, bringing light for the day full of opportunities. Don't miss this sunrise. Don't miss this opportunity. Don't put your clock on the snooze. More seriously, this is the moment when it gets real. Make it real and make it work. Make it work for your company. As the European Union ambassador to Canada, my Ottawa team and I stand by Atlantic Canada Opportunities Agency, Global Affairs Canada, your regional trade commissioners and others to help and support you, as well as to listen to your concerns. Use us for your success. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Ambassador. We appreciate those comments and the invitation. That's wonderful. And the Ambassador said that he's willing to take some questions, so I don't know if we have a mic ready, if we have any questions. We have one right here. The mic is on its way, David.
That will be very challenging, I know. That's the former ambassador of Canada to the EU, so it will be very challenging.
I'm being
David.
set up here. Ambassador, most Canadians, I suspect, are watching with great interest the ongoing NAFTA negotiations, and with all the uncertainty that surrounds the discussions with the U.S. and Mexico, and potentially looking at even not that down the road, having President Trump table a potential withdrawal, a U.S. withdrawal. I'm wondering how the EU is, from your perspective here, watching this process and how you think it might play into where the Ceta could potentially go in terms of business between Canada and the EU.
Mm-hmm. David, thank you very much. So when I came to Canada, I thought that Ceta will keep me busy, but it turned out that NAFTA keeps me even more busy. So as the renegotiation of NAFTA started in the second part of 2017, of course, no surprises that from the EU perspective, being in Ottawa, in Canada, we are following very closely what happens in negotiations. And of course, we closely follow even today what happens in Montreal and what kind of messages will come out from the meetings of the chief negotiators and political level. Having said that, first of all, the NAFTA renegotiations, as we see it, is not only about NAFTA. It is not only about Mexico, United States, and Canada. I think this is by far a wider issue, and this is the reason why the EU is in particularly interested to see how this negotiation will end, what will be the outcome, and what kind of future actually on global trade it is going to bring. Additionally, when Ceta was negotiated, and that, as you know, it took us 10 years, it was somehow idea of seeing Canada being one of the entry points to larger North American market. In parallel, as we speak right now, we are negotiating upgrade of our bilateral trade agreement with Mexico. So somehow we can say that we have two entry points in North America, and in the middle we have something else, but we don't know exactly what it is at the moment. So we will come to that point later on. But having said that, I want to come back to the point I mentioned in my remarks, that I think we should not concentrate only on NAFTA and seeing Canada being part of NAFTA. It is very interesting. It is interesting from the business perspective. But from the other perspective, actually, what Canada is achieving with trade agreements in Pacific, or going beyond Pacific into the Asia, I think is also interesting for the European businesses to see how those dots might be put together and connected. And that might create synergies we never thought about before. Therefore, yes, for Canada, NAFTA is extremely important. NAFTA is important for the European Union, but I think it also gives the opportunity for us to think that all of us together we need to do more on diversification.
Any other questions? None?
I will have my coffee.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.